Chapter 319. The battle between both the sides took a tragic turn, and the third god's flesh was split open. However, even Yi Shiwen was not in a good condition, as the third god's long blade had caused severe wounds on his body from which blood was spilling out. The attacks from both the sides had caused cuts and bruises on their bodies. However, none of them were ready to step back. The third god had lost his two brothers in the hands of Yi Shiwen, and hated him for that. Also, Yi Shiwen eagerly wanted to get out of that place at any cost. It didn't matter to him whether he got hurt or had to hurt in order to escape. Meanwhile, Yi Ziwen's phoenix regeneration technique began to operate frantically. The loud cries of phoenixes could be heard coming from his body. Finally, his strength was restored to the peak. He slashed with his blade, and the full moon creative concept was displayed in the sky before it began to descend upon the vast earth. It seemed as if the laws of the world itself were turning upside down. Although the third god's flesh was split open, he was still as brave as ever. With immense hatred in his heart for Yi Shiwen, he swept his blade out, displaying his blade skill at its utmost. It was obvious that no other expert of half-step legendary 4th stage would have been able to survive this attack except Yi Shiwen. And if it was not for Yi Ziwen's tyrannical body and phoenix regeneration technique to aid him, perhaps even he would have been chopped down already by the third god's blade attack. However, because of this, it was very important to kill him within the shortest span of time. Therefore, Yi Shiwen could not afford to drag on any longer. Both of them had to kill each other's conviction mercilessly. Their blades had pierced into each other's bodies and blood was gushing out from the wounds. The situation was so tragic that everyone had held their breaths. Was it possible that if they had exchanged their places, they would have blocked this kind of attack? Actually, these two were not merely fighting, but they were fighting to kill each other. The scene made everyone feel a chill running down their spine. However, in the end, Yi Ziwen's phoenix regeneration technique began to operate miraculously, and in an instant, he reached his peak condition. The third god soon fell into a disadvantageous position. His body was not as powerful as the tyrannical body of Yi Shiwen, not to mention that Yi Shiwen had been constantly maintaining his combat strength at its peak. Moreover, because of the continuous collisions, the third god had already been severely injured, and the increasing gap between their battle efficiencies was now visible to everyone. Yi Shiwen instantly broke through the space and rushed towards the third god like a powerful golden tide, as if to engulf everything. The long blade held in Yi Ziwen's hand suddenly turned into a golden dragon which then soared along with the golden tides. Yi Shiwen tried to give the third god a fatal blow so that he could score the winning point. The third god also had some kind of healing technique. Although his technique was inferior to the phoenix regeneration technique, the recovery rate was not very slow. Right now they were basically competing on their respective ability to regenerate. Undoubtedly, Yi Shiwen had the advantage in the healing technique, so he did not give any opportunity to the third god to stand up and fight back, and gave him the final blow. The third god's body was completely drenched in blood, but there was still a cold expression on his face. With immense hatred in his heart, he stared at Yi Shiwen and crazily rushed towards him. Boom! Once again a terrific collision took place. The collision set off golden waves which then swept out numerous storms in a circular manner, as if to engulf everything around it. Clang! Soon the sound of metal clanging could be heard, as the third god waved his long blade toward Yi Shiwen, and directly shattered the space in the process. This was a ferocious battle, which caused the blood to drip everywhere from their bodies. It was really a tragic battle. Die! Yi Shiwen looked coldly at the third god as the long blade continued to dance in his hands. Stop! At this time, from the other side, the genie young master was watching the battle. He was concerned with the battle not because he had good intentions or anything, but because he had seen the terror of Yi Shiwen. And if he would let Yi Shiwen kill the third god, then Yi Shiwen definitely would turn toward them after that. Therefore, he had no option other than rescuing the third god at this time. All the members of the genie guards, one after another, charged towards Yi Shiwen, and along with them, the remaining masters of the army of God also rushed towards him. Perhaps a group of half-step legendary realm or legendary realm experts together might not be able to kill Yi Shiwen, but at least they must stop him from killing the third god. As everyone knew that only the third god could compete with Yi Shiwen, and once he was dead, they would completely lose their hope. Boom, boom, boom. Numerous attacks swept towards Yi Shiwen, but none of them could hurt him. Suddenly, a red curtain appeared around him, and those attacks could not damage his body even a bit. This clearly was the effect of Tianyuan Mirror. Yi Shiwen directly rushed toward the third god. At this time, his golden robe was completely drenched in blood, and the wounds on his body were spilling blood in all directions. Perhaps, in his expeditions of all those years, this was the first time when the third god had been beaten so miserably. Even among his peers, no one could hurt him to this extent. And even when he used to fight with the first and the second god, definitely not to kill, he still had never been defeated so miserably. Yi Shiwen swept out his long blade, and although it looked slow, it was very fast in reality. And in the blink of an eye, it appeared right in front of the third god. The third god didn't have his long blade, and he could not block the attack without it. Neither could he compete with Yi Zaiwen's tyrannical body, therefore it was simply impossible for him to resist. Poochie! Yi Zaiwen's long blade without any hindrance directly cut the third god into two halves. His blood splashed out, and pieces of his bones fell from the sky. Finally, the famous third god had been killed by Yi Shiwen. Everyone who saw the battle was stunned. They could not believe that the third god had lost the battle, and not only just lost, but had actually been killed by Yi Shiwen. This was not the same as everyone had expected. In their imagination, the third god should have easily defeated Yi Shiwen because if Yi Shiwen was the rising star in the world of martial arts, then the third god had remained famous for many years. But the reality was something else. Such a famous master had been killed by Yi Shiwen. Moreover, he had been run over by the absolute strength of Yi Shiwen. There was no planning or schemes involved in the battle. He was killed just because Yi Shiwen was more powerful than him. So, did that mean the third god was not strong? No, he was strong. However, even an expert of half-step legendary fourth stage like him could not be the opponent of Yi Shiwen, and died without being able to stop even a move. Such a strong man had been killed by Yi Shiwen had been reduced to a pile of bones. And in addition to this, a strong image of Yi Shiwen had spread in the outside world. Many people's heart shivered. They witnessed the defeat of a top master of the younger generation who was killed and defeated terribly, and did not have even a bit of luck by his side throughout the battle. The road of martial arts was very cruel. On this road, the geniuses were like ants, and even the so-called peerless genius was only a bit stronger than the rest of ants. One could always come across formidable masters and the peerless rivals, who were always eager to excel. These reasons clearly indicated how much difficult it was to tread on this road. Suddenly, a burst of cold wind blew, setting off an endless bloody atmosphere in all directions. Yi Shiwen breathed heavily for a few times. His phoenix regeneration technique began to operate frantically and his countenance again turned to normal. All the wounds on his body healed, and it seemed as if he was not at all hurt in the battle. Now you are next. Yi Shiwen sneered, and looked toward the genie guards and the remaining members of Army of God. The spies of other major forces were in shock. They had seen how Yi Shiwen killed the two gods. And now they were guessing that, could it be that Yi Shiwen would also take down the genie guards in one stroke? Was he planning to completely infuriate the genie guards? The genie guards were unable to believe that Yi Shiwen would actually do such a thing in the illustrious Ming Empire. But for Yi Shiwen, genie guards were simply nothing. Since the two parties had no consideration to give face to each other, there was no scope left for hesitation. War! 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 Yi Zaiwen's long blade was brandished directly towards the genie guards. It turned into a magnificent blade light, forming a dazzling curtain of blades which killed all of them one by one. This blade attack was so magnificent that it suppressed the world itself. The sword in tension ran amok and shattered the space. Moreover, the people who had come to kill Yi Shiwen weren't weak as well. Most of the half-step legendary realm supermasters could be said to have their own heritage and means. However, the genie guards who had surrounded Yi Shiwen could be described as a group of ordinary masters concentrated at one place, with the formidable masters out of the picture. But it was of no use, as Yi Shiwen had suppressed their morale. It was not hidden from anyone that his tyrannical gilded body was incomparable. And with all his strength, he rushed towards the genie guards. Poochie! an expert of half-step legendary second stage, was directly split into two halves by Yi Shiwen. His body parts fell from the sky as his blood splashed out. Tianyuan mirror appeared over Yi Zaiwen's head and slid down a curtain of scarlet light in order to protect Yi Shiwen from the attacks of the genie guards. Now their attacks could not hurt him even a bit. Meanwhile, Yi Shiwen immediately chased the genie young master, while the genie guards were trying to block his way. The genie young master was the real culprit, so it was impossible that Yi Shiwen would let him escape. The genie young master saw Yi Zaiwen's attack coming and immediately waved the mountains and rivers fan with his hand. It exploded a huge mountain of energy which advanced towards Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen snorted coldly and soon unleashed his long blade. He slashed with his blade and it directly cut the mountains and crashed into the chest of genie young master. It directly cut into his chest all the way to his ribs and opened a huge wound, from which the blood began to gush out. He was in very grim state right now. The genie young master screamed and immediately retreated. However, how could Yi Shiwen let the enemy go? So he immediately chased after him. At this time, the genie guards arrived one after another to the rescue of their young master. After all, genie young master was considered as a supreme existence among them. Bang! Yi Zaiwen's figure directly crashed into the group of approaching genie guards, and an expert was immediately killed by him. Ah! Yi Zaiwen's Bladiki swept out, and another legendary realm master of the genie guards was cut into two halves. Chapter 320. Clang! Soon the metal clanging sound could be heard as blade light rushed toward the expert of the army of God. It seemed as if it was cutting its way through the sky before it actually chopped an expert into two halves. Yi Zaiwen's blade suddenly released huge amount of energy which swept away the warriors. The battle between them could only be described as tragic, and none of them were holding their hands. Both of them were looking to kill each other. Yet another one has died. Among the spies of major forces, many masters heard the news of Yi Shiwen killing a legendary realm master. It made them hold their breath. Certainly, the death of a legendary master in the Ming dynasty was discouraging for all other masters. However, even the masters of such level were nothing in front of Yi Shiwen, as they continued to fall prey to him, and fell one after another from the sky, like a bunch of dumplings from a pot. One must not forget that a master of half-step legendary realm was not like a plant which could be cut so easily. However, Yi Shiwen killed such an expert with ease. Go to hell. At this time, the only remaining expert of the army of God, who was at half-step legendary second stage master, burnt his own life energy, and suddenly broke through to the half-step legendary third stage. After that he immediately rushed toward Yi Shiwen. Bang! An explosion took place as that expert laid out his palm and released out a huge rolling mountain of energy, shattering the space in the process. Yi Shiwen used his glowing golden hands to directly tear apart that huge mountain of energy. Yi Zaiwen's big hand found its way to that expert of army of God and pounded on his body. Bang! His bones were broken as his mangled body fell from the sky. Although his body was not weak, it was nothing in front of Yi Zaiwen's palm strength that contained the tyrannical might of gilded tyrant form. Therefore he simply couldn't sustain the blow. Kill! The murderous intent could be seen in their bloodshot eyes, and it seemed as if the entire sky would collapse at once. It was like the sky and the earth were turning upside down, as if it were a scene from the time when the creation of universe had taken place. Yi Zaiwen's complexion remained the same. He had only one thing in his mind, and that was to get rid of this farce and escape as soon as possible. Everyone got stunned after watching the killing intent in Yi Zaiwen's eyes. Yi Zaiwen's body was strong enough to sustain the attack of even the master of half-step legendary second stage. And the attacks from those masters of half-step legendary realm and half-step legendary second stage simply could not hurt him. With the might of gilded tyrant form, even one strike of a palm could slice off a mountain. Right now, Yi Shiwen had a golden appearance with golden energy surging in and around his body. Bang! Finally, even the last master of the genie guards failed to escape from the hands of Yi Shiwen, and was reduced into a pile of bones in the blink of an eye. And now, only the seriously injured genie young master remained. However, at this time, no one could put a check on the casualties of the masters of genie guards and the army of God. Today, those spies of the major forces clearly got to see an apocalyptic scene. After this war, Yi Shiwen would definitely become famous. In addition to this, he was sure to be ranked among the top masters of the younger generation. The last remaining expert's body exploded as his splashed out. It was like a rain of blood from the sky. So terrible, this Yi Shiwen is extremely frightening. He has not only killed 3 gods of the army of God, but even the genie young master would probably die at his hands. This time, Yi Shiwen has really pierced the heaven. Yes, but I'm afraid that the genie guards would be really furious after this. I wonder why their deputy commander has not arrived yet. Well, I am more curious about his inheritance. Don't tell me it is as hard to deal with as that one page of the ancient god scriptures. I can tell that his fortuitous encounters are not limited to that one page of ancient god scripture, as he can simply restore his strength and wounds continuously using some kind of secret technique, which is something far more important than that one page of ancient god scripture. Yes, and his body as well. I do not believe that his body is naturally that tough. He has definitely used some kind of method to toughen his body. He is just like a moving treasure trove, and once news about it spreads out, he will not have a single peaceful day in his lifetime. Hey, in fact, each and every one of these gods' favored geniuses experience fortuitous encounters in their life, but no one gets to know what kind of treasures they obtain in the end. However, the most important thing is that Yi Shiwen has bullied other people, and especially those who have strong backings. It is said that he belongs to a small sect from one of the 10 southeastern countries. Isn't he an ideal choice for bullying? To emerge amid from such a small place of the southeastern region, and have such a combat power is purely a matter of talent which can stun the world. And if he doesn't fall in the future, he will definitely become one of the top masters of the southeastern region. However, it's not easy to survive on this road, as this road is famous as the road of death. In the last many years, many geniuses have fallen on this road. Each and every inch of this road is literally paved with the bones of the fallen geniuses. In order to enhance one's cultivation by leaps and bounds, these geniuses would only get a time frame of a year. Of course, only the so-called exceptional geniuses could walk on this road and strive to grow powerful. Yi Shiwen instantly arrived in front of Genie Young Master and released huge amounts of golden Zhen Yuan, dazzling the entire sky in the process. In the sky, there appeared a huge Han seal which was in the shape of a massive mountain. Immediately after that, this huge mountain of energy swept down towards Genie Young Master. Bang! Genie Young Master's body was smashed down and he fell down from the sky. Finally, Genie Young Master had also died in the hands of Yi Shiwen. Boy, you have courted death. As soon as Yi Shiwen killed the Genie Young Master, a loud sonic boom transmitted from the horizon, and a huge hand advanced towards Yi Shiwen. Yi Ziwen's was startled in his heart, and he immediately opened his devil wings and dodged to one side in order to avoid getting struck by that attack which could have killed him in one blow. Boom! That big gasified hand instantly pounded on the ground, and left a big handprint on it. It was an unusually terrifying scene. Yi Shiwen, you must hurry up and get out of here. Yi Mo shouted immediately. Now the enemy is still far away from us. If they manage to catch up with us, you would be in big trouble. Yi Shiwen nodded, then immediately flapped his golden devil wings and flew straight towards the horizon like a streamer of golden light. It seemed from the attack that the enemy was at least an expert of profound legendary realm. Yi Shiwen was definitely not his opponent. If this enemy's attack from so far away could be this terrifying, if they managed to get close to Yi Shiwen, then he would certainly be in big trouble. At this time, the Ming Empire was in a state of turmoil. The death of the 3 gods and the Jin Young Master had added fuel to the fire. It seemed as if everyone had suddenly turned furious. All 3 gods had been killed off in one breath, and even the Jin Young Master, who had been specifically trained by genie guards, had died a pitiful death in battle. These 2 forces comprised of a total of 200 people, and none of them were ordinary experts. Many of those were actually the so-called extraordinary sons, coming from thousands of prestigious clans of the Ming dynasty. Although the masters of the army of God were not so famous, they still had several young rising stars under the age of 50, who had managed to reach half-step legendary realm, and even legendary realm. In other places, such a genius would be given utmost importance, But here, he was obscured in the dazzling rays of so many geniuses. While considering small countries like the 10 countries of Southeast region, an army comprising of such combat power would be enough to wipe out an entire country. However, even the masters of such caliber had died in the hands of Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen used to be a famous expert earlier, but he became well known on this road after beating the fifth god. However, even after that, his fame remained limited in the vicinity of Yangon City. However, even in the vicinity of Yangon City, his fame remained quite short-lived. In fact, for a majority of people, he was simply nothing. However, also for a person like Yi Shiwen to kill hundreds of experts of half-step legendary realm and legendary realm alike was a great achievement. Suddenly, Yi Ziwen's name spread everywhere in the Ming Empire. Did you hear what happened to that domineering army of God? Out of the 5 great gods, 3 are already dead. Moreover, all 3 of them died in the hands of the same person. These 5 gods used to be the top masters of the younger generation, and Yi Shiwen unexpectedly killed 3 of them in one go. Don't you feel that this Yi Shiwen is really going against the heaven's will? I must say that this guy has established his position among the top players of the younger generation. For a moment, everyone was a bit concerned, and was talking about this fierce young master. As everyone had expected, the army of God and the genie guards issued an arrest warrant for Yi Shiwen. They declared that whoever would catch Yi Shiwen would get a lot of rewards. Army of God had gone out of its way to announce that as long as Yi Shiwen was killed, they would not inquire about the ancient God scriptures. Though nobody took the Army of God's declaration seriously, after all, if anyone were to kill Yi Shiwen, then they would undoubtedly keep the ancient God scripture for themselves. However, with this announcement, at least no one would need to worry about the consequences of seizing the ancient God scriptures from Yi Shiwen, because the Army of God would not come looking for trouble. Suddenly, several forces joined together to catch Yi Shiwen. Apart from the genie guards and the members of the Army of God, many other small and large forces were trying to encircle Yi Shiwen, so that they could get their hands on the legendary ancient God scriptures. It was not a secret that one could use this treasure to enhance one's cultivation by a step. These people were part of the Ming Empire. In fact, some forces of other empires had also turned up in the Ming Empire to catch Yi Shiwen. Although Yi Shiwen had the ability to elude, it was difficult for him to remain invisible for a long time. Yi Shiwen killed a large number of experts for 3 whole days, but on the 3rd day, he was ambushed by the genie guards in a small town. After a protracted battle, Yi Shiwen escaped again after having murdered all of the experts who had encircled him. 10 days later, Yi Shiwen was ambushed by a group of Dongchang experts. However, he continued to kill those experts one after another, though he sustained a serious head injury when he was struck by an enemy in his head. In the end, he managed to escape from there but with severe injuries. Chapter 321. After the head injury caused by Dongchang's expert, Yi Shiwen had disappeared for a total of 3 months. However, 3 months later, he resurfaced and was again intercepted by one of the experts of genie guards. This time, the genie guards had sent an expert who was actually at small complete legendary realm. He had personally led a group of experts to encircle and kill Yi Shiwen. But in the end he himself was actually killed by Yi Shiwen. After this incident, Yi Shiwen had really stirred up the whole country. He was also being considered as the most talented figure of the younger generation now, just like the first god, the second god and others. Not just that, many people also felt that in the entire southern region he could now be ranked among the first-class experts. After having killed and beheaded a lot of experts of genie guards, wherever Yi Shiwen went, he kept on killing all the way. It could be said that the way to his destination had become a bloody battle for him. Even several people from other empires also started coming over, especially to seize the ancient god scriptures from him. Some of them were above the level of small complete realm. So for Yi Shiwen, escaping their murderous chase had almost become like a fight-to-death situation. He even bumped into the deputy commander of genie guards once. He was a very terrifying person of half-step sage realm. And this particular war contributed greatly to the rising popularity of Yi Shiwen all across the country. However, people actually looked askance regarding his combat strength because although he could not turn out victorious in that fight, he still fought to death before managing to escape. Even though that war was seen by countless people, where they also saw a very dreary scene of how Yi Shiwen was split into two halves. However, in the end he successfully escaped from the hands of an expert of half-step sage realm. This was sufficient enough to suddenly send his fame skyrocketing all around. Even those who weren't in his favor, they also admitted that he was indeed a ridiculously strong opponent in the younger generation. Furthermore, it had also become publicly known that Yi Shiwen might have practiced an unparalleled body refining technique, because the body of an average expert couldn't withstand attacks repeatedly. Even if an expert of half-step legendary 7th or 8th stage was to suffer attacks from an expert of half-step sage realm, he would be thoroughly annihilated. Yi Ziwen's insanely tyrannical body was enough to baffle so many people, and this news also became the reason for him being chased by many forces. In addition to this, the rumors about that one page of ancient god scriptures as well as the ancient body refining technique spread everywhere. And many also spread the rumor that Yi Shiwen had a supreme restoration type power technique. This also stirred up many people as they literally went berserk. In this process, several top masters of the young generation had also tried to dig out information about Yi Ziwen's whereabouts, so as to capture him along with his treasures. However, not only were they all eventually butchered by Yi Shiwen, they also helped in further raising Yi Ziwen's popularity all the more. After having escaped from a half-step sage realm expert, Yi Shiwen had already gotten close to true martial university, and that also in just 1.5 months. A large number of experts of the younger generation had eventually concluded their trips and were rushing to Tianmu in large groups. Tianhui City was located in the Qin Empire, but it was actually not managed by the Qin administration. Standing erect on this piece of land, this city had already amassed a history of 10,000 years. This kind of long-established history was enough to give people goosebumps. As for the origin of Tianhui City, no one could say anything clearly about it, but it was reported that the person who laid its foundation was a great personage. Besides, it was also said that a disciple of Tianmu had founded it 10,000 years ago. Even though Tianhui City was in the territory of Qin Empire, it was a very big and lively city. It was also located at the confluence of 3 ancient roads in the Qin Empire. And after passing through this convergence point, if one continued along the road, then one would soon reach true martial city. This was also the prime objective behind Yi Ziwen's coming to Tianhui City, because this was the only city he could now take a break in. Although he was away from the Ming Empire for the last 2 months and presently was in the Qin Empire, the news that he possessed exceptional secret techniques had widely spread everywhere. These 3 ancient roads were no exception either. Therefore, the idea of snatching the ancient scripture from him was not just limited to the Ming Empire, because the Qin Emperor had also stated his desire to obtain that page of ancient god scripture. In the event of Yi Shiwen setting his foot in any of the cities of the Qin Empire, he would be immediately chased down. And this road precisely turned out to be the most brutal place for him. Although he had been having fortuitous encounters repeatedly, the entire journey had remained filled with dangers as well. However, if it hadn't been the case, it would have been impossible for him to gain such huge benefits during this past year. If anyone would see Yi Ziwen's present appearance, he would instantly notice that his forehead had started graying along with the appearance of wrinkles. And though he was still dressed in battered clothes, his overall appearance had definitely changed a lot. This was in fact the side effect of Phoenix regeneration technique. During this entire journey, Yi Shiwen had experienced so many bloody battles that he could not even reckon all of them. It could be said that he had been killing all the way. There were several people who craved for the ancient god scriptures, but one after another, all had been killed by Yi Shiwen. Plenty of times, Yi Shiwen had escaped death, especially the last time when he had barely escaped from an expert of half-step sage realm. That time, he had almost died. Those who hadn't faced the terrifying power of such an expert would never understand it. However, thanks to this fight, he had caught the attention of the Qin Empire's powerhouses. And as a consequence, they were scared away just based on the thought that if such a great expert of half-step sage realm couldn't harm Yi Shiwen, then how could they possibly stand any chance? This way, Yi Shiwen had managed to avoid such a disaster. Even so, his body had almost been cracked into pieces, And if it were not for Yi Mo who towed him away with the help of Tianyuan Mirror, he probably wouldn't have survived. The devil wings had been imparted to him by Yi Mo, so he could naturally escape very fast on his own as well. Before the experts of Qin Empire could show up to capture Yi Shiwen, they needed to escape from there as quickly as possible. At that time, it was Yi Mo who had moved into action and quickly dragged Yi Shiwen along to escape. Only in that one battle, it could be said that almost 10 people were killed, and there never was any possibility of their survival. However, Yi Shiwen had to rely on Phoenix regeneration technique to survive, though it ended up imparting him with his current appearance of someone who was suffering from premature aging. It was just a 20-year-old's appearance, but his forehead was already graying and the life essence within his body had started showing the signs of depletion. This was the so-called side effect of overusing Phoenix regeneration technique. Even if Yi Shiwen was under the clutch of such a big side effect, he was still as enthusiastic as before. This was not enough to make him give up. He had arrived in Tianhui City with the intention of solving the shortcomings of Phoenix regeneration technique, and thus he immediately wanted to look for some herbal medicines in accordance with the ones he had found from the tomb of the Flood Dragon, in order to create a longevity dan which could help in supplementing his exhausted life essence. The lack of life essence was the reason that he had already been stuck in the half-step legendary 4th stage for the last 2 months. It didn't mean that whatever he had accumulated so far was insufficient, but since his life essence was inadequate, he was getting old and that too extremely fast. Although half-step legendary realm had contaminated the reputation of the legendary realm, if someone couldn't achieve the legendary level, they could still achieve the strength of legendary realm, even while being in the half-step legendary realm. However, right now, what he couldn't achieve was the lifespan of legendary realm. Originally, the lifespan of Yi Shiwen used to be more than 500 years, but since he had consumed a massive amount of life essence recently, which was supposed to be converted into his lifespan, therefore, now he was almost equivalent to a person of nearly 400 years old. In other words, he could now be considered as very old. As for why people preferred young talent over old ones, the answer was quite simple. It was because in young age, vitality is exuberant with sufficient life essence along with infinite possibilities, which are enough to support one's life and help one break through to higher levels. The older a person would be, the greater the difficulty he would face in having breakthroughs. The same happened with Yi Shiwen. Now the age of his body was 400 years old, so breaking through to the half-step legendary 5th stage was highly unlikely for him. Although presently he could maintain his fighting strength at the peak of small complete legendary realm, it had still become very difficult for him to have a breakthrough. In fact, it could be said that it had become literally impossible for him. Therefore, he must find a way to supplement his life essence which he had lost so far. In case he really replenished his lost lifespan, he would finally regain the possibility of having further breakthroughs. Although he had the formula to concoct a longevity dan, he hadn't actually begun the preparation because he just had a few herbs required to concoct one. However, fortunately the ones he had were the main ingredients while the rest could be found easily. However, the only thing that was stopping him was a medicinal product called Tianyuan fruit. It was very important to have a Tianyuan fruit to concoct longevity dan. However, these fruits were getting rarer nowadays, as a consequence of which the longevity dan had ended up becoming a legendary drug. In case Yi Shiwen couldn't find the Tianyuan fruit, he would then try to use only the available ingredients to increase his lifespan. However, the effect would be naturally far less. If it wasn't absolutely necessary, he wouldn't waste those ingredients like that. Tianhui City was the #1 bustling establishment in the Great Qin Empire, along with a huge trading market of its own which was also quite famous for often having a lot of good things to buy. As soon as Yi Shiwen entered Tianhui City, he directly went to find Tianhui City's largest chamber of commerce. He had already inquired about it and knew that this chamber of commerce was the largest in the city. It was reported that Tianyuan City had the support of city's main government from behind, so no one dared to underestimate the city's famous chamber of commerce. The story didn't end here, because this Tianhui Chamber of Commerce was reckoned to be the best out there in the entire Qin Empire. Yi Shiwen barely strode in when there came an attendant to greet him. "Welcome to Tianhui Chamber of Commerce. How can I help you?" Yi Shiwen nodded slightly. Finally he had reached the so-called number 1 Chamber of Commerce. Although he was in ordinary attire, or it could be said that he looked somewhat shabby, still the other side didn't express any disgust. At least on the surface he did not express anything. I would like to sell a few herbs in your Chamber of Commerce, but I don't know who would come to receive it. Can you point me in the right direction? Yi Shiwen asked. Respectable gentleman, I don't know what kind of herbs you want to sell here, but we don't accept common medicinal herbs. The attendant clarified. After all, considering the financial resources of Tianhui Chamber of Commerce, common medicinal herbs certainly weren't of any value to them. Is dragon grass good enough? Yi Shiwen asked. The moment the attendant heard that, he was suddenly startled and said, Sir, do you really have dragon grass? Yi Shiwen nodded and thought in his heart that this place was really amazing because the name of dragon grass was even unknown to several warriors. However, this attendant not only knew about it, but it seemed that he also knew that it was a highly expensive and extraordinary item. Gentlemen, please wait for a moment. I will ask our shopkeeper to come, the attendant said promptly. Chapter 322. The attendant requested Yi Shiwen to wait in the hall, and went upstairs to inform the chief shopkeeper of the Chamber of Commerce. After a while, a middle-aged man dressed in a robe came out with the attendant and said, Excuse me for making you wait for so long. I am the chief shopkeeper of the Chamber of Commerce, Xiachun. Xiachun, Yi Shiwen said and cupped his hands in greeting. So how should I address you, gentlemen? Xiachun asked. My surname is Wan. Yi Shiwen didn't tell his full name, and nor did Xiachun ask it again. Obviously, everyone had their own secrets, and as long as the business deal remained genuine, everything else was fine. I do not know what Mr. Wan said about the dragon grass? Xiachun asked. Yi Shiwen pulled out dragon-shaped grass from the void. It was dark green in color, and a puff of smoke could be seen clouding around it. It released a group of lingqi into the surroundings, and even one single puff of its fragrance could fully open one's arteries. This really is dragon grass, Xiachun said in a trembling voice. Although dragon grass was not the most expensive item, it was definitely very rare because it could only be grown inside a dragon's territory. Even though this dragon grass had grown in a flood dragon's cave, it was still a rare treasure. After all, the dragon grass related to the true dragons only existed in the fables. Moreover, this is a second-grade dragon grass. Xiachun was surprised as he looked at Yi Shiwen. He did not expect that Yi Shiwen would actually have a second-grade dragon grass. Although dragon grass was considered a very rare treasure, since ancient times, a lot of people had been able to find a way to cultivate it. The dragon grass could only be grown inside a dragon territory, and dragonki was also required for growing it. Therefore, even if one had the seed itself, the dragon grass could not be grown. So they thought of a way and captured a lot of demon beasts who possessed the blood vessels of dragons within themselves. That was how they had managed to cultivate rare herbs like dragon grass and various other dragon-related medicinal herbs. However, even though those demon beasts had the dragon's blood vessels, they weren't real dragons after all. One must not forget that there was a huge difference between a real dragon and a flood dragon. Moreover, the quality of the dragon grass was also divided into different grades based on their age and nurturing. Dragon grass was divided into 9 grades, with the ones of first grade being of best quality, while the ones of 9th grade were the most inferior. Although the first grade dragon grass was the best, it was already considered as a legendary medicinal herb by the people. The best quality dragon grass could only be grown near the lair of a true dragon, whereas the second grade dragon grass could be grown near the lair of a flood dragon that shared a close bloodline with real dragons. Indeed, a second-grade dragon grass could not be compared with a dragon grass of first grade. It was still a very rare treasure to come across. One must know that once a flood dragon was born in the legendary realm, its growth would be very fast, and it would reach adulthood very soon, reaching sage realm at the end of it. And if someone dared to plunder the lair of a sage-level flood dragon, then was it not equivalent to courting death? This was the reason why second-grade dragon grass was such a rare herb. In the ancient times, only famous experts were said to have obtained second-grade dragon grass, not to mention that only a few experts would usually get the chance to obtain one. and that too with great difficulty. No wonder then that the dragon grass in Yi Zaiwen's hand had amazed Xiaqin. He was a very old man and had been the chief shopkeeper of the Chamber of Commerce for a very long time. So the surprised expression that had flashed on his face a while ago didn't last long. Everyone had their own secrets, and it was not considered a good practice to probe into others' secrets. Xiaqin, what do you think about this dragon grass? Is it good? Yi Shiwen asked. It is excellent, I must say. Xiaqin didn't want to praise the dragon grass too much as he further said, would you like to sell it to us? I was thinking of auctioning it here in your auction house, however. If you will give me the right price, I would love to sell it to you right now. Yi Shiwen said. Really? If Mr. Wen would like to sell this dragon grass to us right now, then we would certainly give the most reasonable price for it, and would not let Mr. Wen suffer an early loss. Xiaqin was pleasantly surprised as he said that. He knew that if Yi Shiwen would have sold this dragon grass in the auction, then it would have slipped away from his hands. Moreover, the news of the appearance of a second-grade dragon grass would have definitely attracted the attention of city's strongest masters. It was certainly one of the best opportunities to draw in tourists and more potential customers. But Tianhui Chamber of Commerce had been in operation for thousands of years. They didn't need to resort to such a stunt to gain popularity. A lot of people would be interested in buying this second-grade dragon grass, so Tianhui Chamber of Commerce would probably wait for the right time to reveal it to the world. In any case, money was not an issue for the Chamber of Commerce, all thanks to its deep foundation of thousands of years, as well as its profound accumulation of resources. Yi Shiwen decided to sell it directly instead selling it at the auction because he couldn't afford to expose himself. Not to mention that his recent exploits had made him quite popular in the region. The sheer number of treasures he possessed could make anyone go crazy. Therefore, even if he was getting a bit less amount of money for the dragon grass, he didn't care. We would give 5 million lingdon for this second-grade dragon grass. However, if you would sell it in the auction, you may get up to 6 or 7 million lingdon. Xiaqin said. That is fine, but I want it right away. Yi Shiwen nodded. Xiaqin immediately threw a small bag filled with 5 million lingdon towards Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen used his soul search skill and verified the quality and quantity of the lingdon. He was impressed by its supreme quality. He smiled and said, also, I would also like to entrust your Chamber of Commerce to help me in buying some medicinal herbs. What kind of medicinal herbs do you want? Xiaqin asked and continued, we may not be the strongest Chamber of Commerce, but you will still find a lot of herbs here. I want to buy Tianyuan fruit, and this and that. Yi Shiwen had prepared a list of herbs and spoke out all the names of the herbs one after another. The other herbs are not difficult to get, but the production of Tianyuan fruit has decreased in the last 2 years. Xiaqin said. Yi Shiwen frowned. Although he had expected this earlier, he still felt disappointed. Tianyuan fruit was a very important ingredient, even though there were many alternatives to it, but their effects were nothing like it. Although we don't have it in our inventory, you may find it in the city's giant market. You can go there and look for things that you need. You will find several warriors in the market who keep all kinds of stuff, and whatever you can't get outside can be easily found in the market. Xiaqin said. There was a sinister look in his eyes as he said this. He already knew that Yi Shiwen was not someone from this city. Thank you for pointing me in the right direction. However, how much will these other herbs cost? Yi Shiwen asked. Well, considers these herbs as gifts which we would like to give to Mr. Wen. Xiaqin said in a generous tone. Yi Shiwen had made a business of 5 million lingdon, and the combined cost of these ordinary herbs was nothing in comparison to that. In fact, the overall cost of these herbs would not even amount to 1 lingdan. If that's the case, then thank you. Yi Shiwen knew that both of them were looking for personal profits, and this was definitely not a favor from Xiaqin. Since the transaction is already complete, I will take my leave now, Yi Shiwen said. Take care. Xiaqin looked at Yi Zaiwen's back profile as he was leaving the place. Xiaqin then went to the second floor and opened the door to a room. There was a tall woman inside the room who was looking outside the window. She appeared to be in her 20s, had a beautiful face, red lips, jade-like teeth and a pretty nose that was complementing her overall beauty. Her big eyes were emitting brilliance. She was clad in a yellow robe and looked just like a fairy. "Miss, I have followed your orders," Xiachen said in a respectful manner. "Good," the woman replied in a melodious tone. "I just have one doubt, if I may ask. Since we have found out that that person is Yi Shiwen, then why not? If Yi Shiwen was here, then he would certainly be shocked. He would be surprised to know that since meeting the attendant to sealing the deal with Xiachen, not even a quarter of an hour had passed, but his identity had still been discovered. One could imagine the influence of the Chamber of Commerce. And like others, do you also want to intercept him for the sake of one page of ancient God scripture?" The woman smiled and said, "This is not how we operate here at Tianhui Chamber of Commerce. Our motto is to keep getting rich while maintaining cordial relations with all." "Indeed. That is absolutely right, Mississippi." Xiachen quickly nodded and said, "You have read the news about Yi Shiwen and his killing sprees, right? So many people have tried to kill him, but ultimately they all died at his hands." The woman continued, "Some people are very stupid because they just cannot seem to understand a simple point that these top-notch geniuses have emerged victorious from their respective regional competitions. Then how can they possibly be ordinary? In fact, some of them have already been noticed by the elder brothers in TMU. Sooner or later, they would join TMU and make contacts with a lot of formidable experts there. In the end, these young geniuses would become invincible masters. I already have detailed files on some of these young geniuses, Yi Shiwen being one of them. I can already tell that in the future, Yi Shiwen would certainly become my junior disciple. Like they say, beat the snake to death or it will cause endless calamity. If we failed to kill him now, then think about the amount of energy and resources we might have to spend in the future to get rid of him. It would be too costly, simply not worth the effort. Only those fools do not know and think that since TMU recruits new disciples only once in 100 years, so they must take advantage of this event to killing those geniuses and gain a lot of benefits. In fact, several clans have flourished because of this twisted grinding of young talents, while at the same time, many clans also perished at the hands of those young geniuses. Those fools must consider the fact that these young geniuses would one day become formidable masters of TMU, and may enter Sage Realm in the future. When that happens, they would surely come back to seek revenge. If you fail to kill them now, you must be prepared to face their wrath later on. I have heard that Yi Shiwen too has single-handedly destroyed an entire clan to take revenge. Therefore, let them fight while we watch from the sidelines." The woman said in a cold voice. "Yes, miss." 5 million Ling Don. The attendant requested Yi Shiwen to wait in the hall, and went upstairs to inform the chief shopkeeper of the Chamber of Commerce. After a while, a middle-aged man dressed in a robe came out with the attendant and said, "Excuse me for making you wait for so long. I am the chief shopkeeper of the Chamber of Commerce, Xiachen." "Xiachen," Yi Shiwen said and cupped his hands in greeting. "So how should I address you, gentlemen?" Xiachen asked. "My surname is Wan." Yi Shiwen didn't tell his full name, and nor did Xiachen ask it again. Obviously, everyone had their own secrets, and as long as the business deal remained genuine, everything else was fine. "I do not know what Mr. Wan said about the dragon grass?" Xiachen asked. Yi Shiwen pulled out dragon-shaped grass from the void. It was dark green in color, and a puff of smoke could be seen clouding around it. It released a group of Lingqi into the surroundings, and even one single puff of its fragrance could fully open one's arteries. "This really is dragon grass," Xiachen said in a trembling voice. Although dragon grass was not the most expensive item, it was definitely very rare because it could only be grown inside a dragon's territory. Even though this dragon grass had grown in a flood dragon's cave, it was still a rare treasure. After all, the dragon grass related to the true dragons only existed in the fables. Moreover, this is a second-grade dragon grass. Xiachen was surprised as he looked at Yi Shiwen. He did not expect that Yi Shiwen would actually have a second-grade dragon grass. Although dragon grass was considered a very rare treasure, since ancient times, a lot of people had been able to find a way to cultivate it. The dragon grass could only be grown inside a dragon territory, and dragonki was also required for growing it. Therefore, even if one had the seed itself, the dragon grass could not be grown. So they thought of a way and captured a lot of demon beasts who possessed the blood vessels of dragons within themselves. That was how they had managed to cultivate rare herbs like dragon grass and various other dragon-related medicinal herbs. However, even though those demon beasts had the dragon's blood vessels, they weren't real dragons after all. One must not forget that there was a huge difference between a real dragon and a flood dragon. Moreover, the quality of the dragon grass was also divided into different grades based on their age and nurturing. Dragon grass was divided into 9 grades, with the ones of first grade being of best quality, while the ones of 9th grade were the most inferior. Although the first grade dragon grass was the best, it was already considered as a legendary medicinal herb by the people. The best quality dragon grass could only be grown near the lair of a true dragon, whereas the second-grade dragon grass could be grown near the lair of a flood dragon that shared a close bloodline with real dragons. Indeed, a second-grade dragon grass could not be compared with a dragon grass of first grade. It was still a very rare treasure to come across. One must know that once a flood dragon was born in the legendary realm, its growth would be very fast and it would reach adulthood very soon, reaching sage realm at the end of it. And if someone dared to plunder the lair of a sage-level flood dragon, then was it not equivalent to courting death? This was the reason why second-grade dragon grass was such a rare herb. In the ancient times, only famous experts were said to have obtained second-grade dragon grass. Not to mention that only a few experts would usually get the chance to obtain one, and that too with great difficulty. No wonder then that the dragon grass in Yi Zaiwen's hand had amazed Xiaqin. He was a very old man and had been the chief shopkeeper of the Chamber of Commerce for a very long time, so the surprised expression that had flashed on his face a while ago didn't last long. Everyone had their own secrets, and it was not considered a good practice to probe into others' secrets. Xiaqin, what do you think about this dragon grass? Is it good? Yi Shiwen asked. It is excellent, I must say. Xiaqin didn't want to praise the dragon grass too much as he further said, would you like to sell it to us? I was thinking of auctioning it here in your auction house, however, if you will give me the right price, I would love to sell it to you right now. Yi Shiwen said. Really? If Mr. Wen would like to sell this dragon grass to us right now, then we would certainly give the most reasonable price for it, and would not let Mr. Wen suffer an early loss. Xiaqin was pleasantly surprised as he said that. He knew that if Yi Shiwen would have sold this dragon grass in the auction, then it would have slipped away from his hands. Moreover, the news of the appearance of a second-grade dragon grass would have definitely attracted the attention of city's strongest masters. It was certainly one of the best opportunities to draw in tourists and more potential customers. But Tianhui Chamber of Commerce had been in operation for thousands of years. They didn't need to resort to such a stunt to gain popularity. A lot of people would be interested in buying this second-grade dragon grass, so Tianhui Chamber of Commerce would probably wait for the right time to reveal it to the world. In any case, money was not an issue for the Chamber of Commerce, all thanks to its deep foundation of thousands of years as well as its profound accumulation of resources. Yi Shiwen decided to sell it directly instead selling it at the auction because he couldn't afford to expose himself. Not to mention that his recent exploits had made him quite popular in the region. The sheer number of treasures he possessed could make anyone go crazy. Therefore, even if he was getting a bit less amount of money for the dragon grass, he didn't care. We would give 5 million Ling Dan for this second-grade dragon grass. However, if you would sell it in the auction, you may get up to 6 or 7 million Ling Dan. Xiaqin said. That is fine, but I want it right away. Yi Shiwen nodded. Xiaqin immediately threw a small bag filled with 5 million Ling Dan towards Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen used his soul search skill and verified the quality and quantity of the Ling Dan. He was impressed by its supreme quality. He smiled and said, also, I would also like to entrust your Chamber of Commerce to help me in buying some medicinal herbs. What kind of medicinal herbs do you want? Xiaqin asked and continued, we may not be the strongest Chamber of Commerce, but you will still find a lot of herbs here. I want to buy Tianyuan fruit, and this and that. Yi Shiwen had prepared a list of herbs and spoke out all the names of the herbs one after another. The other herbs are not difficult to get, but the production of Tianyuan fruit has decreased in the last 2 years. Xiaqin said. Yi Shiwen frowned. Although he had expected this earlier, he still felt disappointed. Tianyuan fruit was a very important ingredient, even though there were many alternatives to it, but their effects were nothing like it. Although we don't have it in our inventory, you may find it in the city's giant market. You can go there and look for things that you need. You will find several warriors in the market who keep all kinds of stuff, and whatever you can't get outside can be easily found in the market, Xiachen said. There was a sinister look in his eyes as he said this. He already knew that Yi Shiwen was not someone from this city. Thank you for pointing me in the right direction. However, how much will these other herbs cost? Yi Shiwen asked. Well, considers these herbs as gifts which we would like to give to Mr. One, Xiachen said in a generous tone. Yi Shiwen had made a business of 5 million lingdan, and the combined cost of these ordinary herbs was nothing in comparison to that. In fact, the overall cost of these herbs would not even amount to 1 lingdan. If that's the case, then thank you. Yi Shiwen knew that both of them were looking for personal profits, and this was definitely not a favor from Xiachen. Since the transaction is already complete, I will take my leave now, Yi Shiwen said. Take care. Xiachen looked at Yi Ziwen's back profile as he was leaving the place. Xiachen then went to the second floor and opened the door to a room. There was a tall woman inside the room who was looking outside the window. She appeared to be in her 20s, had a beautiful face, red lips, jade-like teeth and a pretty nose that was complementing her overall beauty. Her big eyes were emitting brilliance. She was clad in a yellow robe and looked just like a fairy. Miss, I have followed your orders, Xiachen said in a respectful manner. Good. The woman replied in a melodious tone. I just have one doubt, if I may ask. Since we have found out that that person is Yi Shiwen, then why not? If Yi Shiwen was here, then he would certainly be shocked. He would be surprised to know that since meeting the attendant to sealing the deal with Xiachen, not even a quarter of an hour had passed, but his identity had still been discovered. One could imagine the influence of the Chamber of Commerce. And like others, do you also want to intercept him for the sake of one page of ancient God scripture? The woman smiled and said, This is not how we operate here at Tianhui Chamber of Commerce. Our motto is to keep getting rich while maintaining cordial relations with all. Indeed. That is absolutely right, Mississippi. Xiachen quickly nodded and said, You have read the news about Yi Shiwen and his killing sprees, right? So many people have tried to kill him, but ultimately they all died at his hands. The woman continued, Some people are very stupid because they just cannot seem to understand a simple point that these top-notch geniuses have emerged victorious from their respective regional competitions. Then how can they possibly be ordinary? In fact, some of them have already been noticed by the elder brothers in TMU. Sooner or later, they would join TMU and make contacts with a lot of formidable experts there. In the end, these young geniuses would become invincible masters. I already have detailed files on some of these young geniuses, Yi Shiwen being one of them. I can already tell that in the future, Yi Shiwen would certainly become my junior disciple. Like they say, beat the snake to death or it will cause endless calamity. If we failed to kill him now, then think about the amount of energy and resources we might have to spend in the future to get rid of him. It would be too costly, simply not worth the effort. Only those fools do not know and think that since TMU recruits new disciples only once in 100 years, so they must take advantage of this event to killing those geniuses and gain a lot of benefits. In fact, several clans have flourished because of this twisted grinding of young talents, while at the same time, many clans also perished at the hands of those young geniuses. Those fools must consider the fact that these young geniuses would one day become formidable masters of TMU, and may enter Sage Realm in the future. When that happens, they would surely come back to seek revenge. If you fail to kill them now, you must be prepared to face their wrath later on. I have heard that Yi Shiwen too has single-handedly destroyed an entire clan to take revenge. Therefore, let them fight while we watch from the sidelines. The woman said in a cold voice. Yes, miss. Chapter 323. Yes, miss, those medicinal herbs were for. Xiachen said hesitantly. It's a longevity dan, isn't it? The woman said. Except a few, All the herbs were very important for making a longevity dan. And though Yi Shiwen had added a lot of irrelevant herbs to confuse the others, they had still seen through his plan in a glance. It seems that he is not as simple as we imagined. Although the recipe to make longevity dan is not very difficult to acquire, but the short supply of required herbs is the reason why only a very few people can make it. The woman smiled and continued, but he should also worry about his bodily functions which have dropped significantly, and as a result, the situation he now finds himself in is difficult to deal with. Moreover, the hair on his temples has also turned white. It seems that in the outside world, there are rumors about his miraculous healing technique. But it doesn't seem to be true. Xiachen said. That is not true. You may not have heard how many times people said that he won't survive, but he is still alive, and has done many things which to others seemed impossible. This is because of his miraculous ability, and I further admit that it's extraordinary too. The woman said, despite his transformation, amiability has made him rich. The day Yi Shiwen had returned from the Chamber of Commerce, he did not think that some people might be analyzing him thoroughly. However, right now, he wasn't concerned about anything else apart from acquiring a Tianyuan fruit. The reason being he could easily use other herbs in place of Tianyuan fruit, but their effect would be minuscule in comparison to that of a Tianyuan fruit. All those precious medicinal herbs obtained from the Flood Dragon tomb now appeared to be futile. Yi Shiwen had listened to Xiachen's instructions to reach the city's largest market, which in any case, was not a difficult task. Now he only needed someone who was familiar with the place. Finally, he found the so-called trading market, because it was actually considered a black market, situated in the public square. However, these warriors could not be considered professional merchants because they came to sell only 1 or 2 items. One couldn't even be sure whether they would have anything to sell the next time or not. Yi Shiwen used his soul search technique to look through the entire market. Indeed, there were some good things as well inside the market. However, those warriors who had set up the stalls didn't only have the strength of the truth level. There were also some legendary level experts among them who possessed unfathomable cultivation. This was the reason why he couldn't look through their cultivation in depth. This place appeared like the territory of crouching tigers and hidden dragons. There were many good items in the market, but Yi Shiwen was only looking for a Tianyuan fruit, and did not even give those other items a thought. It was like finding a needle in a haystack, but Yi Shiwen knew he had no other choice and had to find the Tianyuan fruit anyhow. Wang Jingtian, didn't you say earlier that you wanted to sell this fruit today? Suddenly, a loud voice came from a distance and attracted Yi Ziwen's attention. Tianyuan fruit. Yi Ziwen's eyes suddenly glowed, and he ran towards the source of the sound. He was surprised to see a young man around 20 years old in a stall, and his stall was unlike others as it was open from all sides. One could easily smell the light fragrance of some medicinal fruit coming out of the stall. This was definitely a Tianyuan fruit. And not just that, this Tianyuan fruit was also floating in the air, attached to a golden chain. This Tianyuan fruit and the ordinary medicinal herbs were not the same. Tianyuan fruit didn't grow in the soil. It directly grew in the sky instead by absorbing the abundant lingqi from the atmosphere. It was very strange because sometimes Tianyuan fruits often grew so high in the sky that ordinary people could not see them. I will not sell it. I have told you that I will only exchange it for the ingredients which can be used for increasing lifespan. I am not exchange it for anything else. Wang Jingtian shook his head and said firmly. He was a young man. However, a formidable master was standing before him, and was looking bitterly at him. How dare you not give me face? You shameless man. Don't you know that? That master spoke but was interrupted by Wang Jingtian, who then glanced at him and said, Did you not hear me? I will not sell it. Now get lost. The medicinal herbs that increase lifespan are very precious, and you want to exchange your Tianyuan fruit for them? That formidable master bitterly looked at Wang Jingtian, but in the end he didn't dare to create any scene, and went away after only giving Wang Jingtian a hateful stare. As there were guards present in the vicinity, he could not do anything and left angrily. Yi Shiwen immediately rushed forward and said, Would you like to exchange this fruit for a longevity dan? Wang Jingtian was surprised to see a young man with white temples when he looked up. He was further taken aback by the mention of longevity Dan. He could not believe his ears, and a surprised expression appeared on his face. He wanted to exchange the Tianyuan fruit for any medicinal herb that could increase lifespan. However, it would definitely be better if it was a longevity Dan. Do you really have a longevity Dan? Wang Jingtian looked at Yi Shiwen in disbelief. Longevity Dan recipe was not a secret, at least among the big forces, but it was hard to find the ingredients for refining it. Even the most experienced alchemist could only refine a longevity Dan that could increase the lifespan by 5 or 10 years. And even if a longevity Dan could only increase life by 5 years, it could still be sold at an astronomical price. Yes, but in order to refine longevity Dan, I will need your Tianyuan fruit, Yi Shiwen said lightly. Wang Jingtian looked at Yi Shiwen skeptically. It seemed as if he found it hard to believe Yi Ziwen's words. Have you got any other option? You think you can exchange your Tianyuan fruit with any medicinal herb that increases lifespan? It is simply impossible. Yi Shiwen continued. If you give me the Tianyuan fruit, then I can give you a longevity Dan after refining it. Wang Jingtian thought for a moment. Even he didn't know how things would work out, and the probability of an exchange was very little because the medicinal herbs that could increase lifespan were very rare in the world. Moreover, he only had one Tianyuan fruit, and if he gave it to Yi Shiwen, he would lose that one as well. But perhaps it was the only chance he would get, and if he missed this opportunity, he might not get another. Wang Jingtian thought a lot and finally had to bite the bullet. He said, "Well, I believe you, but I hope you will not let me down. Trust me, you will not be disappointed," Yi Shiwen said in a delightful manner. Yi Shiwen along with Wang Jingtian moved to the tavern, and Wang Jingtian handed over the Tianyuan fruit to him. Yi Shiwen then immediately began his alchemy to concoct longevity Dan, while Wang Jingtian stood guard outside. Both of them wanted to get the longevity Dan, so Wang Jingtian was also keeping a close eye on him lest he escaped. Yi Shiwen did not stop Wang Jingtian from monitoring him, nor did he mind it. He had never thought of deceiving Wang Jingtian anyway. After getting the Tianyuan fruit, Yi Shiwen had immediately begun to refine longevity Dan. Wang Jingtian, in the meanwhile, had made a protective barrier outside the door in order to protect him. Yi Shiwen took out a huge alchemy furnace from the Tianyuan mirror. He sat down and put his Zhenyuan to use in order to ignite the furnace, and started the calcination process. Yi Shiwen blindly added a lot of herbs into the furnace according to the recipe. Yi Ziwen's face turned expressionless, and he kept staring at the alchemy furnace. He was constantly controlling the size and duration of the fire in order to understand the mysteries of alchemy. To do so, even the special space in his mind was constantly helping him in learning all sorts of mysteries of the alchemy. In no time, 3 days had passed. Waiting outside, Wang Jingtian was getting anxious. Although he too knew that the alchemical process to concoct longevity Dan was not easy, he still couldn't help being anxious. He certainly knew that Yi Shiwen was inside and had not escaped, otherwise he would have gone inside the room. Boom! An explosion took place and suddenly a medicinal fragrance spread out in the surroundings. And though it wasn't a big explosion, Wang Jingtian still heard it outside. Creak! Soon, Yi Shiwen opened the door and came out. "Mr. Yi, what happened?" Wang Jingtian asked in a somewhat nervous tone. "It was successful. As promised, here is your longevity Dan." Yi Shiwen stretched out his palm and showed a longevity Dan to him. "This is longevity Dan." Wang Jingtian looked with abjection, but he could clearly see that this was indeed an extraordinary longevity Dan. This longevity Dan is the best quality product and can increase the lifespan by up to 100 years. Wang Jingtian looked incredibly at Yi Shiwen. He could not believe that Yi Shiwen had given him a longevity Dan which could increase the lifespan by up to 100 years. According to him, the best result a longevity Dan could give was increase the lifespan by 10 years, and even if it could have added 5 years, he still would have accepted that happily. But a lifespan increase of 100 years was very rare, even beyond Wang Jingshan's imagination. "Thank you, Mr. Yi. You are very generous and great, and I am deeply grateful to you," Wang Jingtian said emotionally. To be honest with you, this longevity Dan is going to be used by an important elder of my clan in order to increase his lifespan, so that my clan does not decline in the future. Yi Shiwen nodded. He had already figured that out from Wang Jingshan's age, since he was not even 100 years old. So why would he be so desperate about increasing his own lifespan? There could only be one possibility behind his desperation. There must be an elder in his clan who had reached the end of his lifespan, and was in a desperate need to increase his lifespan as soon as possible. To Wang Jingtian, Yi Shiwen might have seemed like an extremely generous person who had given him a longevity Dan which could increase one's lifespan by 100 years, but the reality was that Yi Shiwen had refined a total of 36 longevity Dan, not to mention that each and every one of them could increase lifespan by 100 years. In fact, if he had possessed better ingredients, then he might have been able to refine special longevity Dan, which could actually increase lifespan by 1,000 years. Chapter 324. Yi Shiwen had perfectly followed the steps for concocting pills with the help of the mysterious space. Therefore, as long as he had sufficient ingredients, he could easily refine that so-called divine longevity Dan, which could increase lifespan by 1,000 years. Moreover, as a result of his nearly perfect technique, Yi Shiwen had refined 36 longevity Dan. For most people, it would be simply impossible to match his level. Yi Shiwen had burned a total of 100,000 Ling Dan in order to perfectly carry out the alchemic process of concocting pills. It was absolutely impossible for other masters to pay such a price by burning this big an amount of Ling Dan at once, mainly because they would not have gotten an opportunity like this. Only a capable individual like Yi Shiwen could. At the rate with which Yi Shiwen was burning Ling Dan, even the amount of Ling Dan which he had obtained recently wouldn't suffice to match his consumption rate. Fortunately, he wasn't going to follow the way of Dan, so he did not need to grasp all sorts of methods to prepare Dan. Even if he had the need to grasp some methods, he was capable enough to afford the consumption rate. However, if Yi Shiwen wanted to embark on the way of Dan, then the associated consumption rate would definitely drive him crazy. Even the most experienced alchemists could refine only 12 longevity Dan on an average, and for that they were considered extraordinary. It was impossible to refine 36 longevity Dan like Yi Shiwen did, and that too in one go. Wang Jingtian profusely thanked Yi Shiwen, and left after obtaining a longevity Dan. Yi Shiwen also didn't engage him any further, and let him go. However, as soon as Wang Jingtian had left, Yi Shiwen immediately began the closed-door training, so that he could consume those longevity Dan. Not to mention, each of the longevity Dan could increase one's lifespan by 100 years, and Yi Shiwen had 35 of them. Together, these many longevity Dan were more than sufficient for him. However, even though these lifespan-increasing drugs and medicinal herbs were of fine quality, they could increase one's lifespan, at most, by only 50%. In other words, regardless of how many longevity Dan he would swallow, his lifespan could increase up to 750 years, at the very most. Even if some legendary individual possessed the lifespan of a millennium, then too his lifespan could only increase by 500 years. A person's lifespan could increase naturally if he could have a breakthrough from one realm to the other. Otherwise, they would have to rely on these kinds of foreign objects for increasing lifespan, and that too only by 50% of their total lifespan. For the past millions of years, no one had been able to break this rule, the so-called deadline. If more than half of one's lifespan had already expired, and one still had not managed to have a breakthrough to the next realm, then nothing could really be done. Of course, half lifespan was different for different realms. In addition to that, these longevity Dan were very expensive, and to refine such kind of longevity Dan with the help of very sparsely found ingredients was something extremely rare. They were so scarce that it was impossible for experts to have enough longevity Dan to fully increase their lifespan by 50%. In fact, the most an ordinary person could obtain was a longevity Dan which could add merely 5 years to his lifespan. However, Yi Shiwen was not like others. He did not want to increase his lifespan. He merely wanted to replenish his life essence which he had exhausted, and besides, there were no other restrictions on him. He had just used up his life essence to a critical degree, but in reality he was only about 20 years old. However, Yi Shiwen didn't have a long-term supply of longevity dawn. And though in the long run, Phoenix regeneration technique would not only become his biggest ally, but also become an important factor towards restricting his development. Therefore, although there were 35 longevity dawn currently in his possession, he must save them for the future. Yi Shiwen sat on the bed with his legs crossed, and the Tianyuan mirror began circling above his head. It put layer upon layer of curtains of light in order to give protection to Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen swallowed one longevity dan, and it turned into a clear stream of energy as it started circulating throughout his body. Even though Yi Ziwen's body had aged, the very moment he swallowed the longevity dan it began to restore his youth. Soon, a massive amount of efficacies were absorbed by him, and were transformed into life essence. Very soon Yi Shiwen had completely absorbed the longevity dan. Consequently, he appeared a lot younger than before. Thus, Yi Shiwen, without stopping for a moment, went on to swallow the second, third and fourth longevity dan. After he had consumed the fourth longevity dan, his countenance was completely transformed. Now his appearance once again had changed to that of a 20-year-old guy from that of a middle-aged man. He once again looked like the same carefree and uninhibited young genius that he was before. I can finally try to have a breakthrough into the half-step legendary 5th stage. Yi Shiwen sighed and said. He had been at the half-step legendary 4th stage for quite some time now, and because of the lack of life essence, he had been unable to have a breakthrough. Now that his life essence was finally replenished, he could try to have a breakthrough. And since he must have a breakthrough, he would have to face the heavenly tribulation. However, he chose not to do it in the city, for it might alarm the city lord. Yi Shiwen therefore flew out of the city for hundreds of miles, and stopped in a valley. Finally, over the valley in the sky, he released his imposing aura in an absolutely unrestrained manner. Bang! A thunderous sound reverberated and many layers of thick clouds began to appear in the sky from a distant place, building up above Yi Ziwen's head. Yi Shiwen looked serious and did not dare to underestimate this heavenly tribulation. Finally, the heavenly tribulation was ready to descend upon Yi Shiwen. But this time, it was not an ordinary heavenly tribulation. On the contrary, there were pure lightning and thunder weapons, including blades, swords, spears and halberds. Almost 18 kinds of weapons which were condensed out of lightning rushed straight down towards Yi Shiwen like a heavy rain of weapons, bombarding his body. Boom, boom, boom. These weapons bombarded Yi Ziwen's body, but only a puff of bluish-black smoke came out of his body, as if it had caught fire. The attack of these weapons caused countless wounds on Yi Ziwen's body, but his Phoenix regeneration technique soon started healing his wounds. In any case, these small cuts weren't an issue at all. Crash bang! More weapons started appearing in the sky and thus, the intensity of weapons raining down on him increased drastically, but there was no way to shake Yi Ziwen's willpower. It seemed the heavenly tribulation did not have any method to seize Yi Shiwen. But this time, the lightning in the sky no longer condensed into weapons. It instead condensed into demon beasts which began to launch long-ranged raid towards him from all sides, causing the entire sky to tremble in the process. Yi Shiwen simply sneered, but did not run away. Instead, he advanced like a golden lightning, and finally rushed towards the group of lightning demon beasts. Bang! Yi Shiwen clenched his fist and flourished it directly towards the lightning beast and smashed it. The lightning beast immediately turned into the purest form of lightning energy, which was then absorbed by Yi Shiwen, thereby making his gilded tyrant form even more formidable. Just then, another lightning beast took advantage of this opportunity, and arrived in front of Yi Shiwen. And in an attempt to bite his arms, it opened its bloody mouth which appeared just like a sacrificial bowl. Yi Shiwen immediately shoved his fist forward towards his target. Bang! Yi Ziwen's fist passed through the mouth of the lightning beast, and smashed its head. The head of the lightning beast immediately exploded, and it turned into lightning energy which was absorbed by Yi Shiwen. Bang! 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 Yi Shiwen flourished his palm successively to kill those lightning beasts. As a result, they immediately transformed into lightning energy which was absorbed by him. Roar! Soon a loud roar of a beast emerged from the clouds. While Yi Shiwen was busy killing the other lightning beasts, a strange and terrifying beast appeared in the sky. crouching in the sky. It looked just like a small mountain. It also resembled the king of 10,000 beasts. It stared at Yi Shiwen from above, and immediately a killing intention as well as a cold aura swept out everywhere. As a result of that loud roar, the entire sky seemed to be crumbling down. After watching Yi Shiwen killing the last lightning beast, the lightning beast king finally made a move. Like a vast ocean, a formidable breath rushed towards Yi Shiwen. Its mountain-like body advanced and made a long-ranged raid towards him. It appeared as if the entire sky was cracking into pieces, and the entire universe was trembling in general. Yi Ziwen's golden divine clothes fluttered as he shot his palm forward. This was a peerless attack, and a murderous intention surged out, and it seemed as if the horizon itself was shattered due to the impact. Bang! That huge lightning demon beast king immediately tore apart Yi Ziwen's big hand, that was made up of qi. The lightning beast roared as if to swallow the entire country, and as a result of this, even the horizon started to sway fiercely. In the blink of an eye, that huge lightning beast king arrived in front of Yi Shiwen and howled, spraying out a fishy-smelling wind from its mouth. It seemed as if the entire sky would be severed any time now. Bang! A terrible collision took place, and it appeared as if the space itself would explode and collapse. Yi Ziwen's hands directly tore apart the thighs of the lightning beast king. Although it didn't give rise to a bloody scene, it was still an abnormally intense battle. Yi Shiwen took advantage of this opportunity and pursued the lightning beast king. Both his hands turned into dragon claws, and went forward to grab the head of the lightning beast king. Bang! 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 Yi Shiwen and the lightning beast king launched their attacks on each other. This lightning beast king was truly extraordinary, and an ordinary master would have met his death if he had encountered this beast. However, it was facing the gilded tyrant form of Yi Shiwen, and therefore, it was becoming very difficult for it to injure him with its attacks. However, on the other hand, Yi Ziwen's every attack was seriously injuring the lightning beast king. Bang! Yi Ziwen's last strike finally rumbled and killed the lightning beast king at last. The heavenly tribulation finally dispersed, and an enormous energy was released out of his body. Finally, he had set foot on the half-step legendary 5th stage, and his combat power had also broken through from the level of half-step legendary small complete to reach the level of half-step legendary 6th stage. Yi Shiwen looked towards northwest, where the true martial university was located. After a very long time, it had finally started recruiting new students. Way of Dan. Yi Shiwen isn't going to follow the way of Dan, which can also be called as the way of alchemy. This means that he won't be investing all his time and money into concocting all sorts of dawn. However, if he ever needs to grasp a new alchemical method to concoct a particular type of dan, he should be able to afford the consumption of spirit dawn, which are necessary to fuel the mysterious space while Yi Shiwen comprehends the alchemical method. Longevity dan. Its literal translation would be adding life dan. There are all sorts of longevity dawn, depending on the quality of ingredients used to concoct them. A divine longevity dan can increase one's lifespan by 1,000 years. The ones concocted by Yi Shiwen can each increase one's lifespan by 100 years. For an expert with a lifespan of 1,000, no matter how many longevity dawn he consumes, his lifespan can at most go up to 1,500 years. Half-life span for legendary realm is 250 years. Half-life span for Sage Realm is 500 years. Phoenix Regeneration Technique. This technique is also known as Heavenly Phoenix Regeneration Technique. It burns the practitioner's life essence to regenerate his wounds, and the imminent lack of life essence hinders the breakthrough. Tianyuan Mirror. It can also be called Heavenly Source Mirror. It releases curtains of light which envelop Yi Shiwen from all sides, forming a protection screen all around him. Half-Step Legendary Small Complete is a level sandwiched between Half-Step Legendary 5th Peak and Half-Step Legendary 6th Stage. When an expert reaches Small Complete level, it basically means he is midway within the realm. Chapter 325. This ancient road had once again seethed with excitement after being isolated for 100 years, as countless young geniuses had set foot on this road to enter true martial university. At present, however, one could see that this road had started to quiet down steadily since the university, had already opened its gates for new disciples. Yi Shiwen would certainly win the top spot when it came to leaving the most profound impression on everyone simply because many top masters had already crossed this road. He, however, was at the top of the last batch of disciples. In fact, he had already killed many formidable masters in order to successfully cross the whole way, spilling blood everywhere in the process. Along with the ringing sound of the bell, True Martial University began to accept new disciples. Everyone knew that these geniuses would by default become the disciples of True Martial University if they had managed to survive till now. However, if they weren't able to pass the grand assessment, it would be equivalent to bringing about their own destruction. Yi Shiwen, at this time, was boasting a haughty appearance in front of everyone. Moreover, no one dared to mess with him, even if they envied him for having the ancient god scripture. True Martial University was located among the mountains in the central part of the southern region. Several spiritual arteries overlapped each other in the campus, and one could see the clouds and mist curling up to form a purple canopy, making this place appear like the fairyland. Located in the surroundings of the enormous True Martial mountain range was a city, rising steeply from the level ground and revolving all around the entire mountain range. One couldn't guess the real size of this settlement, but the combined land area of this city and the True Martial mountain range was almost comparable to that of a small country. Not to mention that this territory didn't belong to any country. Rather, it had belonged to True Martial University since the day of its establishment. Moreover, once in every 100 years, this huge city would bustle with excitement as it welcomed the new students into the city. That was why it was called the Wuxia City of True Martial University. Previously, even though the Yuan school had also welcomed new disciples by assigning them mountain peaks, but there was an unimaginable difference between the orientations performed by these two institutions. This was an extraordinarily huge city spread all across the ravine, which was brimming with a terrifying, formidable breath. No one actually knows when this city was first established. However, countless geniuses have come out from the True Martial University over the years. Naturally, they all must have started their journey from here only. Yi Shiwen said as he sighed. The Wuxia city's wall was very huge, and extended up to several hundred feet or more. Moreover, it stretched up to an unknown number of miles. Not to mention, this city was not like a common dynasty city since it didn't have an army of its own. Instead, it was constantly patrolled by the disciples of True Martial University. Yi Shiwen noticed some young experts hugging the wall in one particular portion to prevent themselves from falling down. They seemed quite miserable in that state. At this time, some strong figures were standing at the entrance gate. Each of them was a master of half-step legendary third stage or more. In addition, some of them were exuding the dreadful aura of ominous beasts. Yi Shiwen saw that dozens of such tyrannical masters were standing here, though he couldn't figure out what were they waiting for. These people appeared to be in their 20s and 30s, and looked very young. They must be the experts of the younger generation, who had come to enter True Martial University. None of them appeared to be weak. Yi Shiwen had maintained a very low profile, so he could mix into the crowd comprised of young experts. More and more people were joining this ever-increasing crowd. When will they open the gate? So slow. An expert of the younger generation spoke impatiently. I am going to smash that gate open. You can go ahead if you are looking to die, but do not think of taking us with you. A young expert standing next to that young disciple sneered and said, Is there something I haven't paid attention to? How come they haven't opened the gates yet? A warrior asked to clarify his doubts. Yes. The Wuxia city gate would open only in the evenings for welcoming the new disciples this year. Therefore, people who arrive before, or after, will have to wait until it's time. As it stands, we will just have to wait since there are 4 hours to go before the sun sets. That young expert explained. Is there no other way to get in? Why should we wait like this for one full day? A man asked in a discontented tone. This is exactly the so-called killing one's prestige with a stick. We are all considered as God's favored ones. The proud young masters who have emerged from various empires, and have risen above others in the process of distinguishing ourselves. It is inevitable that some of us are going to be domineering and quite difficult to deal with. Therefore, the true martial university is using this harsh and unreasonable treatment to kill our acute spirit now itself. Didn't you notice those guys hanging from the city wall? Those idiots were caught by the senior disciples of Law Enforcement Hall and were suspended from the wall. A disciple sneered and explained, "Yeah, it's important not to do anything silly here. There is one way to go inside, and that is by directly breaking through the main gate. The main gate has an array of 108 wooden puppets. If you are capable of crashing your way through that, then you can go in directly," that disciple explained in a somewhat envious manner. However, even the experts of half-step legendary 5th stage are not capable enough to break through that array. Perhaps only the experts of half-step small complete level can manage to go inside like that. However, it seems like there is no such expert among us, or they would have already blown up those wooden puppets to go inside. Yi Shiwen smiled lightly, for he found this assessment a little mean. It basically meant that one could be arrogant if they had the required strength to do so. If one didn't have the strength, then they must be humble, and should behave properly at all times. Yi Shiwen, since there is already a way to go inside, we must breach our way in. Yemo said. This is also a test of one's heart and determination. This is not just the test of one's strength, but also a test of one's inner conscience. If one doesn't possess unequaled conviction, then one might not be able to continue following the path of martial arts practice anymore. Yes, Yi Shiwen nodded. It was also a test of one's own inner conscience and determination. Therefore, he must keep advancing while crashing his way through the obstacles. Yi Shiwen slowly walked towards the main gate. He heard a loud shout at this time. Then let me try. Could there be any such array which can stop me from rushing inside? A man, riding a beast, emerged from the crowd. He was a tall and young man, with dark complexion and frivolous eyebrows. A killing intent was overflowing from his eyes. He seemed to possess an invincible self-confidence, and was looking disdainfully from the corner of his eyes at the moment. He was sitting on a powerful and exceptional divine tiger that was more than 20 feet tall. Its entire body was emitting bright rays of light, and its 4 powerful claws appeared quite vigorous and effective. When brandished, any one of its claws could tear open the space. A good deal of formidable and imposing aura was discharged all of a sudden. The young man stimulated that divine tiger into moving towards the main gate. Yi Shiwen happened to be in his way too. However, the young man didn't stop, and instead increased his pace. The divine tiger suddenly rushed towards Yi Shiwen with an intention to kill him. Everyone's gaze turned towards Yi Shiwen as they cried out in alarm. This person had the best of misfortunes. Could it be that he would be knocked down and killed immediately? Yi Shiwen didn't feel anything as he allowed that young man and his tiger to collide with himself. Bang! That man and his tiger released a divine beam together, and caused strong air waves to sweep across the surroundings, as if to engulf everything. Everyone held their breaths. That tiger had an excessively rampant and domineering man on its back. Before coming to the Xian city, he had planned to never give his opponent a way to survive. An opponent must be killed at any cost. This kind of temperament was extremely overbearing. As smoke and dust dispersed, a surprising scene appeared in front of everyone. Although in their opinion, Yi Shiwen should have been knocked down and killed by this attack. The reality, however, was entirely different. He certainly didn't die. Instead, he used just one hand to push aside that divine tiger's forehead. This dreadful attack had been blocked by Yi Shiwen without resorting to any unnecessary movements. You are courting death. That young man immediately became furious. The divine tiger he was sitting on was also unable to control its anger, which was evident from that electric look that flashed in its eyes. Its front claw almost turned into an electric light as it advanced forward in order to grab Yi Shiwen. That electric light looked just like a blade as it advanced forward, as if it would cleave Yi Shiwen into 2 halves from the middle. No one was able to properly catch a glimpse of the vigorous movement made by that divine tiger's claw. They were all amazed in their hearts, and thought that this young man was really too strong. Not to mention that the divine tiger he was sitting on was a demon beast of half-step legendary 4th stage, or higher, and was certainly far stronger than these people. This time, that young man, who was in the way, would most likely die. It was such a pity that an outstanding genius like him had finally reached Xian City after surviving through all the hardships and massacres, only to be killed like this outside the main gate. In a moment, rays of golden light flashed, and on contrary to everyone's expectations, Yi Shiwen wasn't split into two halves. Instead, the divine tiger's claw was directly chopped down by his blade. That divine tiger screamed endlessly. Yi Ziwen's complexion didn't change, even by a bit, as he shot his palm, without showing any trace sympathy, which then impacted upon the forehead of that divine tiger. Bang! That divine tiger's head was directly blasted by the explosive might of Yi Ziwen's attack. Even a divine tiger of half-step legendary 4th stage couldn't block a single move of Yi Ziwen's. Just what kind of backing does this man boast? Everyone was stunned. A formidable demon beast of half-step legendary 4th stage had actually been killed by Yi Shiwen. And that too in just one move. Had they been there in his place, they would perhaps been in a far more miserable state. Yi Ziwen's attack was so strong that it had directly exploded that divine tiger's head. Then his palm attack advanced further, and towards that young man, only to crash into his body as well. Bang! That youngster was sent flying by the terrifying force contained in Yi Ziwen's palm attack. In fact, it left a huge hand imprint on his chest, while his bones were shattered due to the impact. He spouted out a mouthful of blood, while his body was sent flying. Just one palm attack had killed a despotic tiger, and severely injured an arrogant man. However, it was not clear whether the young man was dead or just severely injured. Who dares to be impudent in the Xian City? A furious shout reverberated from the horizon, followed by a frightening heavenly sword chi directly falling towards Yi Shiwen. If this attack was not blocked in time, it could actually kill him. Chapter 326. Who is being so vicious? Yi Shiwen, escape quickly or this attack will kill you. Yemo shouted promptly. Yi Shiwen snorted as a cold look appeared on his face. His hands emitted rays of golden light, and tore apart that heavenly sword chi. Who is this coward that attacks me from the shadows? Yi Shiwen asked coldly, while his gaze was tightly fixed above the city wall. Above the city wall stood several disciples with the true Martial University's emblem embroidered on their chests. They were releasing a murderous aura, while looking towards Yi Shiwen, with rays of cold light flashing in their eyes. It was me, do you have any complaints? Those disciples directly flew down from the top of the city wall. They were headed by a young man clad in a cyan robe. He looked very calm and confident, and had fairly handsome facial features. There was a divine look in his eyes. His oblique eyebrows stretched all the way to his temples, making him appear rather majestic. Do you want to die? Yi Shiwen retorted coldly. Just then, a murderous aura suddenly surged towards him. Judging from that murderous aura, he could tell that the heavenly sword chi from a moment ago wasn't just a warning shot. Instead, this one was shot with the intention to kill him. Yi Shiwen, you really are like the way rumors portray you, arrogant and despotic. Do you think that this place is some countryside like your southeastern region? You dare to threaten us law enforcement hall's disciples. This is far more serious than a first-grade crime. The cyan-robed young man spoke in a cold voice. Yi Shiwen gawked for a moment, since he had never thought that this person actually knew him. Although it didn't seem like that initially, the attack from a moment ago had actually been premeditated a long time ago. So who could he possibly be? Yi Shiwen had recently offended a lot of people, but this man was deliberately waiting for him here. It seemed as if the enmity he held within his heart wasn't little. Yi Shiwen had killed too many people by now, and a lot of them had close relatives. However, he simply did not know who this person might have been related to. If you want to live, then you better leave. Don't try to provoke me. Yi Shiwen stated coldly as he simply ignored that so-called law enforcement disciple. Many of the masters, standing in the background, were dumbstruck upon hearing this. It was hard to believe that Yi Shiwen would have actually dared to speak in this manner. Although the people who had come here were well-known geniuses, these enforcement disciples were no less. None of them were easy to deal with. They too had arrived here in the same manner, not long ago. The present of these law enforcement disciples was going to be the future of the new ones. If one would say that these geniuses had assembled like ants on the ancient road, then their reputation would basically become a joke after joining true martial university. Here, they wouldn't be considered anything more than mediocre. Warriors did not dare to be dissolute, regardless of whether their temperament was peaceful or irascible. Not just because there were as many experts in true martial university as clouds in the sky, but also because those experts were extremely strong. The might of true martial university's experts was not a very big deterrence for the new disciples. The newcomers knew that if they were to practice for a few hundred years, then their own achievements wouldn't be lacking. However, they had been restrained by the fear of those countless tyrannical seniors, and had ended up becoming indifferent. In short, they had silently restrained their temperaments. How could they be so overbearing and daring, like Yi Shiwen, and compete with law enforcement hall's disciples? Though they didn't really know how the true martial university was partitioned on an administration level. But an organization like the law enforcement hall could appoint several forces under their banner with authority enough to provide penalty, and also iron and blood. These forces were in charge of pedestrians' discipline within the city. I'm warning you. You better behave, and let us capture you. You will follow me to the law enforcement hall to receive punishment. Don't forget that true martial university is located here. That young man spoke coldly. Right at that moment, one after another, many other law enforcement disciples released their terrifying aura, which tightly shrouded Yi Shiwen from all sides. The bystanders suddenly started trembling with fear, even though they were considered geniuses in their own merit. The overall might of these law enforcement disciples was too terrifying, far more tyrannical than their own. A series of vigorous and imposing auras swept across the surroundings, even the weakest being at a profound degree of half-step legendary 5th stage. In fact, majority of these auras were at half-step legendary small complete realm. However, the young head disciple had the cultivation level of legendary 6th stage. Moreover, he wasn't just an ordinary expert of legendary 6th stage. He was at its peak. None of the new disciples would dare to take the initiative of stepping forward when faced with this kind of lineup. Even if there were some geniuses of half-step legendary realm hidden among them, the overall might of the opposite side was far beyond their reach. Everyone could feel their hearts trembling. Was this the true might of this university? They still had such strength, even though they seemed like ordinary disciples of law enforcement hall. Since that guy was an expert of the legendary realm, it seemed like he must have been unable to have a breakthrough within the half-step legendary realm. However, no one would laugh at people like him. The road of half-step legendary realm was difficult to tread on. Only a few could manage to persist till the very last stage. There weren't many who could obtain instant success. Before long, they would start to get anxious, not knowing where to advance to, or how long they should wait. In the end, they would make the decision to have a breakthrough to the legendary realm. Yi Shiwen? That's Yi Shiwen, right? He is so strong. No wonder that guy who tried to pass through the gate earlier couldn't stand up to him. Spoke a disciple. It could be said that Yi Shiwen had started walking on this ancient road towards the end. His pace could also be regarded as very slow in comparison. Not to mention that he hung at the end of the last batch of disciples. However, his fame wasn't less. In fact, he could be regarded as an ominous yet illustrious figure of the younger generation. After all, not everyone could survive after being hunted by almost all the forces of the Great Ming and the Great Qin Empire. Moreover, he had continued to grow stronger all this while, and had slaughtered several of his pursuers. Yi Ziwen's fame had been thoroughly established after a few months of such slaughtering. Even though he was hanging at the end of the last batch, his glory had forged ahead at an incredible speed, even faster than his progress speed. A lot of masters had died at his hands on the 3 ancient roads located within the borders of the Great Ming Empire and Great Qin Dynasty. The most famed among them were the 3rd, the 4th, and the 5th god. They used to be well-known young talents, and no one had thought that they would ultimately die at the hands of Yi Shiwen. They say Yi Shiwen has a page of ancient god scriptures, but I don't know whether that's true or false. Do you want to die? If not, you should give up on the idea of taking him on. Didn't you see what happened to that man a while ago? If you want to die, go die. Don't implicate us. Hee, these law enforcement disciples are certainly being unfriendly. They just want to test Yi Shiwen to see whether he really deserves his reputation. We will finally get to see some action. Why should I go with you? If you're a disciple of Law Enforcement Hall, you should speak out the rules one by one. Yi Shiwen replied indifferently. Humph. You dare to cause trouble in Xian City by disregarding the government rules. That young man spoke coldly. Being a newcomer, I am not aware of these so-called government rules you talk about. Moreover, that the place where I am standing right now isn't within the bounds of Xian City. The city is on the other side of the gate. Yi Shiwen replied in a cold voice. Stop your nonsense. A disciple shouted in a somewhat impatient manner, and immediately began to advance towards Yi Shiwen. A sinister smile spread on his face as a divine beam appeared in his hand. It seemed as if he would crush Yi Ziwen's bones with his bare hands. You are overreaching yourself. Yi Ziwen's speed was even quicker as he shot his palm towards the incoming attack. Perhaps that disciple would have never thought that Yi Shiwen would actually dare to retaliate against him, a disciple of Law Enforcement Hall. Immediately, an explosion took place. Boom. Crunch. There was a loud crunching sound. That disciple's arm was broken in the explosion, and blood splashed out from it. Yi Shiwen took a step forward, instantly causing the space beneath his feet to collapse. He arrived in front of that disciple in the blink of an eye, and threw a kick. Stop! The head disciple roared the moment he saw that. However, Yi Shiwen couldn't possibly care. His kick landed on that disciple's chest, and instantly shattered his sternum. His body turned upside down, and was sent flying into the sky. You are quite courageous. That head disciple became furious. Yi Shiwen had crippled one of his subordinates in front of his eyes. This was nothing less than a slap in his face. Yi Shiwen sneered. Your courage is fatter than mine. You first dared to launch a deadly sneak attack on a new disciple before his enrollment, and then you blame him for breaking the rules? After saying that, Yi Shiwen turned around to face those outstanding geniuses and said, Everyone, we all are peerless geniuses of our respective regions, and have come here from far-off countries after facing countless hardships along the way. But for what? Is it not to excel and become successful? We are heroes and not stray dogs. You just heard that these people knew me, and deliberately come looking for trouble still. They had planned to intercept and kill me in front of such a huge crowd of new disciples at the main gate of Xian City. I don't know the rules of the true martial university, but I can say for sure that there isn't a rule that allows people like them to bully newcomers. How can such people hold the position of Law Enforcement Hall's disciples? If we enter true martial university and things remain like this, would there be even a hair of safety and security left to protect us? Do they have the right to be so rampant because they joined the university before us? We demand an explanation. How did they become law enforcement disciples? The disciples were just observing from the sidelines. This matter was of no concern to them. They were just enjoying themselves while watching an entertaining scene. They felt that Yi Shiwen was completely against the rules after hearing what he had said just now. So what? This had nothing to do with them. In fact, the party in question was actually creating trouble for Yi Shiwen, and some of the new disciples were just taking joy in Yi Ziwen's misfortune. After all, if Yi Shiwen were to get killed, then it would only mean one less rival in the future. However, Yi Ziwen's assertion had changed the situation entirely. If these seniors could dare to intercept Yi Shiwen so arrogantly outside the university, then there was a possibility that they themselves might face a similar fate someday. As rookies about to join true martial university, they lacked unity and strength of a group. Who would guarantee their safety if a senior blatantly attacked them for no reason? They were accustomed to living in a world where strength was revered. But it was not as if they couldn't question the legitimacy of some rules. One can choose to have a breakthrough directly from any stage of half-step legendary realm to the corresponding stage of legendary realm, whenever they feel like. This is because continuing to have breakthroughs within the half-step legendary realm become almost impossible at later stages, and only super geniuses can proceed to higher stages of half-step legendary realm. Chapter 327. Yi Ziwen's words had aroused a sense of urgency in everybody. Indeed, these people were considered the finest of geniuses in their respective regions. Their cultivation level was sufficient to run amok their natives. However, True Martial University was the best institution of the southern region. Over here, they would find their cultivation levels lying at the bottom. They would get to join the university, but only as inner disciples, outer disciples, and so on. As a result, it would be impossible for the new disciples to be domineering from the beginning. Anyway, these outstanding geniuses weren't stupid. They were smart enough to know the facts, such as one could only turn to rules for protection if one's strength was weaker. However, they would find themselves in a pickle if someone were to intentionally trample these rules. This would only mean that the formidable senior disciples could intentionally look for reasons and could kill their weaker junior disciples. Then who would ensure their safety? Yi Shiwen had as many enemies as hair on an ox, simply too many to count. However, the other new disciples had their fair share of foes. Everyone had killed and offended many people on their way to True Martial University. Of course, none of them had kept account of enemies they might have made in the process. This matter wasn't just Yi Ziwen's personal concern, for it was related to their safety as well. They would most likely be killed sooner or later if they couldn't abolish this rule. Hence, if they didn't come to his aid now, then who would support them later? Everyone understood the importance of the interdependence between two neighboring states when facing a common enemy. In just a matter of few breaths, everyone had decided to stand together with Yi Shiwen. As a result, the public sentiment soon swayed in his favor. That's right. We demand an explanation. What kind of a rule is this? Which government sets up an absurd rule that allows powerful seniors to attack its new disciples whenever they feel like? If that is the case, then we aren't some ordinary individuals either. You can't weed us out whenever you want. Right. We want an explanation, or there will inevitably come a day when no one will know how we died. We won't let it pass that easily. We will not let go of this matter until we get an explanation. The uproar at the city's gate attracted the attention of the disciples who were presently patrolling above the city's wall. They all gazed at the commotion, one after another. Isn't that Yan Wufang? What's he doing down there with the newcomers? I don't know, but it seems like he has gained perks from someone in return for making things difficult for Yi Shiwen. Ehe, this is going to be fun. Didn't you see earlier how Yi Shiwen was intending to break through the barrier? He is definitely not a merciful guy. This is certainly going to be very interesting, ha ha ha. Indeed, most of these newcomers are rebellious, let alone Yi Shiwen. I guess we've all heard of his outstanding performance on the ancient road. Gee, he is not the type to stay idle and take the beating. Plus, these law enforcement disciples are the most rude and unreasonable bunch. It seems that the clash between these two groups is certainly going to be entertaining. The law enforcement disciples' faces turned ugly after the public sentiment shifted against them, head disciple, Yan Wufang's being the worst. Initially, they had thought that it would be very easy to find a reason which could allow them to butcher Yi Shiwen. However, they hadn't imagined that Yi Shiwen would instigate a feeling of dissatisfaction within this crowd of new disciples. As the matter had developed, Yi Shiwen had been able to gain the public sentiment in his favor using just a few words. You've got a sharp tongue, Yi Shiwen. We are not here for the others. We just want you to accompany us to the law enforcement hall, so you can receive a punishment for injuring a fellow disciple at the main gate of Xian City. Yan Wufang tightly clenched his teeth, while his razor-sharp gaze was directed towards Yi Shiwen. He was furious because Yi Shiwen had compelled him to give an explanation. However, his excuse was far from convincing for the new disciples. They were not speaking up for Yi Shiwen, but for ensuring their own safety in the future. Were their lives really so worthless that anyone could kill them on a whim? This explanation did not silence them. On the contrary, it made several of them angrier. Yi Shiwen, first you committed a heinous crime by injuring a disciple of the sect you're about to join. And now you're actually daring to resist the arrest. You are truly reprehensible. Yan Wufang spoke in a cold voice as his complexion paled. He was attentively watching Yi Shiwen. Don't you consider attempting to kill a new disciple a heinous crime? Is that the way law enforcement hall operates around here? Yi Shiwen sneered and asked. Shut up. Don't you dare think you can willfully slander the name of Law Enforcement Hall. Got it? Be prepared to die today. Those Law Enforcement Hall disciples couldn't help it, and rushed towards Yi Shiwen to kill him. They joined hands, and called forth the net of justice. It seemed as if this net was blotting out the sky covering the earth. In fact, it seemed as if the entire world had been brought under one umbrella. So long as someone was entrapped in this net, making an escape was impossible. This was an important device used by the Law Enforcement Hall to capture the disciples who had committed crimes. This unusual divine tool was called Dragnet. Yi Shiwen snorted coldly. His hands emitted golden rays of light as he advanced towards that inescapable net. Bang! The dragnet was grabbed by Yi Shiwen. A burst of divine rays appeared inside the net and began exploding one after another. However, Yi Shiwen remained unscathed since these explosions only triggered ripples on his golden body. Rip! A massive sound of something being torn reverberated as Yi Shiwen ripped the dragnet was apart. Yi Ziwen's body was extremely overbearing, to the extent that the dragnet had been simply torn apart by his bare hands. Everyone was incomparably shocked, especially those law enforcement disciples. The dragnet had never failed to capture its target, let alone getting ripped apart with bare hands. This Yi Shiwen was way too fierce. Humph! Yi Shiwen snorted coldly. A surge of golden energy rushed out of his golden body and transformed into 10,000 sword ki. It then directly slaughtered those law enforcement disciples in one swoop. They screamed pitifully before transforming into blood fog. You dare to kill the law enforcement hall's disciples? Yan Wufang was already enraged to the peak. He had never thought that such a situation could arise since he was confident of killing Yi Shiwen. However, the outcome had been the complete reverse. These disciples would never have thought they would get killed instead. That too before laying a single finger on Yi Shiwen. Yan Wufang had been under the impression that they would murder Yi Shiwen without any problems, and no one would find out about it since the dead cannot testify. Also, who would bother to speak up for a dead man? However, he never expected that Yi Shiwen would turn out to be so ruthless. Yan Wufang released the terrifying energy of half-step legendary 6th stage. This energy soon spread in all directions. Yi Shiwen, do you realize what you have done today? Let me arrest you without a fight. I might still leave your corpse intact, and may even not implicate your family. Yan Wufang announced. So you're thinking of implicating my family as well, ah? A murderous intent could be seen exploding in Yi Ziwen's eyes. It soon spread out in the surroundings. Anyone who could contemplate such a thing would be inviting the wrath of the emperor. This matter had already made him extremely angry. It was obvious that the opposing party had specifically showed up to get rid of him. In fact, they were even willing to go as far as involving his family. As it stood, Yan Wufang had effectively attempted to blackmail Yi Shiwen into subjugation. However, it was impossible for Yi Shiwen to capitulate without a fight. Well, aren't you a splendid law enforcement disciple? Yi Shiwen laughed. He hadn't expected Yan Wufang to be so arrogant. Humph! Yan Wufang sneered. He didn't say anything, and directly swept out a terrifying sword light. It seemed like a silver chain as it instantly advanced towards Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen roared, while his hands began to radiate waves of golden light. These waves condensed to form a terrifying beam of divine energy. Immediately after that, the incoming sword light was torn to shreds by Yi Ziwen's divine beam. Yi Shiwen, today you have dared to go against the law. You've also killed the disciples of Law Enforcement Hall. No one can save you now. You can give up on the idea of joining the true martial university, since you're about to die. Yan Wufang shouted. I probably won't get myself enrolled if the true martial university shelters a generation of snakes, insects, rats, and ants like you and your buddies. Yi Shiwen sneered and replied. He was likely to depart in case the true martial university decided against giving them a formal explanation. There were more than just one or two enemies lurking in the university, simply waiting for his arrival. Hence, he obviously wouldn't join unless his safety was guaranteed, since it would tantamount to throwing his life away. Humph! Yan Wufang's expression turned even uglier after being insulted like that. A formidable aura swept out of his body and spread into the surroundings. It seemed as if it would engulf everything. Being a law enforcement disciple, Yan Wufang was certainly strong. An unusual terror swept out of his body as he rushed towards Yi Shiwen. Yan Wufang went all out and issued a magnificent sword light. Suddenly, it seemed as if the entire sky had been beset with stars. His body emitted countless rays of starlight, which instantly blotted out the sky as they aggressively lunged towards Yi Shiwen. Boom, boom, boom. It could be said that Yi Ziwen's palm strength was simply infinite. The golden divinities boiled within Yi Ziwen's body as those starlights were directly slapped to smithereens by his palm. The attacks from both sides were equally terrifying. If this battle had taken place elsewhere, the surrounding space would have exploded and broken into pieces. However, Yi Shiwen could feel that this expanse had been solidified to an unprecedented extent. So much so, that even a battle between two legendary-level experts couldn't break it. Even so, the aftermath of their clashes caused the air to vaporize. One could imagine the unconquerable terror of witnessing this battle up close. Everyone was dumbfounded as they watched this battle, the new and senior disciples alike. They hadn't anticipated that this battle would get this far. They were finding it difficult to believe this. Moreover, something happened, which left them panic-stricken. It hadn't taken long for Yi Shiwen to gain the upper hand. Yi Shiwen had thoroughly suppressed Yan Wufang's sword attack. So much so, that the incoming sword light had been rendered ineffective about 10 feet away from his body. In fact, it wasn't even able to explode as a result of the suppression. Everyone could see that Yi Shiwen had already attained a huge advantage in the fight. Yan Wufang was then smacked around by Yi Shiwen several times. He spat a mouthful of blood, while his complexion turned deathly pale. Chapter 328. Yi Ziwen's blank expression turned ice-cold. The killing intent could be seen in his eyes. Yan Wufang had crossed all the limits by threatening Yi Ziwen's family. This was something he simply could not tolerate. Bang! Yi Shiwen invoked the Han seal and summoned a huge mountain which fell from the sky. There was scope for Yan Wufang to resist the attack. Bang! All the bones within his body appeared to have been completely smashed by this attack. How is this possible? Yan Wufang had no power to fight back? Who in the world is this Yi Shiwen? Looks like a tenacious fellow who very much wants to join the government office. These new disciples are quite fierce. They are not willing to bear even the slightest bit of grievances when they feel wronged. Their determination is higher than the sky. They are rebellious, and certainly cannot be tamed easily. This is not just about feeling wronged. If I were to come across this matter, then I would have also wanted to get hold of that Yan Wufang. I too would have wanted to slaughter him. However, I wouldn't dare to such a thing right before the main gate of Xian City. It can be said that Yi Ziwen's courage knows no bounds. Such assassination attempts happen every time the new disciples arrive, but the tables were turned this time. Those assassins died miserable deaths at the hands of their target. Well, all I can say is only the elites among the elites are able to survive till the end. Yi Shiwen, you'll regret if you kill me. Yan Wufang shouted as he stared coldly at Yi Shiwen. There was actually a hint of panic in his eyes since he hadn't expected for things to turn out this way. His ego had been shattered by Yi Shiwen. Moreover, he no longer had the strength to fight back. Yang Wufang had joined the university about a century ago, but the disparity between their strength levels was already quite huge. Not to mention, this gap was only going to widen in the future, until there would be no scope for comparison whatsoever. Such a person could become a huge threat to him once grown up. Yan Wufang's gaze somewhat flickered, and it seemed as if some schemes and tricks were revolving through his mind. Yi Shiwen looked coldly at him. He did not know what Yan Wufang was secretly planning, but he knew that Yan Wufang was up to no good. With an awe-inspiring killing intention, Yi Shiwen said, "It's too bad that you won't be around to see me regret." Yi Ziwen's killing intention surged up in a flash. At this time, Yan Wufang was worried since he had finally recalled that Yi Shiwen was a killing machine. His fellow law enforcement disciples had already been slaughtered by Yi Shiwen. It also seemed as if Yi Shiwen had already given up on the idea of entering true martial university. Then why would he hesitate from killing one more? Law enforcement hall's disciples were usually very arrogant and domineering in nature. In fact, they didn't even get along well with the other disciples. It was no wonder that even when the other disciples were aware that Yan Wu Tian is in danger, they didn't come down from above the city wall to save him. Yi Shiwen, stop. Please let me go. I promise I will never come back to trouble you again. I will also give you big rewards and benefits. At this time, Yan Wu Fang was finally afraid. Do you really think that I will let you go? Yi Shiwen said lightly as his big golden hand flourished forward. He then grabbed Yan Wu Fang's neck. Go to hell and regret your decision there. Stop. At this time, an old and hoarse voice sounded out from the middle of Xian City. An old figure suddenly came out from the void. He had wrinkles on his face and was dressed in black clothes. It's the city lord. How come the city lord himself has moved into action? This incident has made a huge noise, and even the Xian City's lord has been informed about it. I didn't expect that the mysterious city lord would arrive at the scene himself. He must have realized that this matter would go out of control. Yi Shiwen, regardless of the present situation, immediately shot his palm towards Yan Wu Fang and killed him, as if he simply hadn't heard the words of Xian City's lord. Ha! The old city lord sighed. You are too reckless. Yi Shiwen seemed wary of that old city lord, and asked, Don't tell that you are here to intercede in his favor? The old city lord shook his head and said, He is not worthy of my arbitration. However, it is such a pity, because you were such a fine young successor. The old city lord had a look of pity on his face. Yi Shiwen suddenly felt relieved after hearing that this old city lord, who had an unfathomable cultivation, was not here for backing Yan Wu Fang. Since this old man was extremely terrifying, Yi Shiwen had no choice but to maintain utmost vigilance. You possess a magnificent spirit, but you are way too reckless. The old city lord said, Sometimes, it is not a bad thing to exercise forbearance and take a step back. You also saw the situation clearly, didn't you? I was willing to step back, but they had put a sword to my neck. I would have died, had I not fought back. Yi Shiwen said. However, there is no doubt that you will offend groups of people in the university if you continue to carry such attitude, especially the people of Law Enforcement Hall. The old man's words had left many disciples dumbstruck, since they were concerned about this matter. It could be seen that he and Yi Shiwen had never met before, but he still said such words of praise for Yi Shiwen. This indicated that the old city lord was very optimistic about Yi Ziwen's future. That must be the reason why he was having such a deep conversation with a stranger like Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen felt somewhat grateful in his heart. Who would go out of their way to praise a stranger? This also made Yi Shiwen to put down his hostility. If true martial university is all about such stuff, I would just leave as early as possible since I haven't yet joined it. Yi Shiwen said indifferently. He seemed quite tough and aloof in his stance. Forget about it. I am not handling this matter anyway, but sooner or later, the people of Law Enforcement Hall will come looking for you. The old man saw Yi Shiwen as a lofty and unyielding character. He didn't say much since he knew that Yi Ziwen's anger was not directed at him. Thank you for warning me, sir. Yi Shiwen said as he cupped his hands in obeisance. Good, but you must keep in mind that you cannot dispose of someone inside Xian City. Otherwise, you will be punished according to the government's rules. The old man said indifferently. It's a given. But what if it was in self-defense? Yi Shiwen asked since he was not usually the one to provoke others. He had certainly killed many masters on the way, but mostly in self-defense. He rarely took the initiative to stir up trouble. That will naturally have nothing to do with you, said the old city lord. Whoever stirs up the trouble shall be held responsible for it. Thanks a lot for reminding me, sir. Yi Shiwen said as he cupped his hands in obeisance again. You must keep on striving, okay? Your innate talent is extraordinary. Your future prospects will certainly be boundless if you manage to walk till the very end of the way of martial arts. The old city lord finished speaking. Then his figure immediately disappeared in the void. This wasn't just fast speed, but genuine flash step. Yi Shiwen hadn't even stepped inside the Ying Xian city, but had still attracted the attention of so many people. Not to mention that he had also stirred up the entire crowd of new disciples. He had dared to kill the law enforcement disciples at the main gate. Although the disciples of law enforcement hall were wrongful in their approach, but Yi Ziwen's actions were still overly courageous. Yi Shiwen hadn't yet entered the city, but his fame had already spread throughout it. The disciples who had been patrolling above the city wall had already spread the news throughout the city. Moreover, the news also contained information about Yi Shiwen being praised by the mysterious city lord for having boundless future prospects. Yi Ziwen's reputation had suddenly risen up. Yi Shiwen, go break through the array. Yi Mo said. Yi Shiwen nodded. After passing through this matter, he had become famous in the entire city, and had also attracted the attention of a lot of masters. Naturally, keeping a low profile had no significance anymore. Yi Shiwen moved towards the city gate, and those new disciples also followed after him, one after another. At this time, they didn't have any other choice except going inside along with Yi Shiwen. They obviously didn't wish to wait until the next day. As soon as Yi Shiwen entered through the gate, the entire scene around him suddenly changed. It seemed as if everything between the heaven and earth had disappeared. Yi Shiwen realized that he had stepped into an array. Whoosh! A puppet suddenly appeared before Yi Shiwen. Although it had a simple structure, it was exuding a terrifying aura towards him. It unexpectedly started to use proper fist technique to fire punches at him. Each of its punches was arousing the spirit ki and directing it towards Yi Shiwen. This puppet had the strength of half-step legendary 5th stage. Bang! Yi Shiwen attacked with his palm, and a sound similar to a dragon's howl reverberated. Finally, his palm pounded on that puppet's wooden body. Yi Shiwen suddenly found out that he was unable to crush that puppet into powder like he had initially expected. Its body was merely broken into pieces. This puppet's toughness had gone far beyond his imagination. These puppets are made of special wood. They are even harder than the ordinary metal and stone. Yi Mo said. The martial heritage of true martial university was simply hard to imagine. They had actually used this level of treasure as stepping stones to test the strength of its disciples. There was always a way for 2 or 3 individuals to be able to cross over to the other side. However, it was hard to imagine how many of these puppets had been prepared for testing the strength of so many disciples who had walked on the ancient road before. I see. Yi Shiwen nodded. It was truly so, but he wasn't slow in changing his tactics either. He immediately covered his hands with golden divinities, and then shot his palm towards a wooden puppet. Bang! That puppet was instantly destroyed by Yi Shiwen. It would take time to explain the scene, but in fact, Yi Shiwen was moving extremely fast. None of the puppets who had jumped out in front of Yi Shiwen were any closer to being his opponents. He was emitting waves of golden divinities which were simply like an irresistible force sweeping away all those puppets. Regardless of their numbers, these puppets could not do anything to stop Yi Shiwen, and were smashed into pieces by him. Bang! Yi Shiwen lowered the emission of golden waves when he finally smashed the last puppet, and finally entered the city. Is that Yi Shiwen? He sure is eager to be first. Those puppets of half-step legendary 5th stage simply didn't have the strength to fight back. His body is also very strong. Strong enough to tear even gold and iron into pieces with bare hands. I have never come across such tyrannical body before. Other people have also passed this barrier before, but they've had to rely on various technique and magical powers to dash through the array before crossing over to the other side. Yi Shiwen is the only one who was able to sweep away those puppets with his bare hands. Such a strong and capable disciple has arrived in this group of youngsters. Perhaps it is really going to be very lively around here now. They are all quite strong and capable. But I must say that there are a few people with special physical constitution. I heard there's a guy who has a titan's body, but I really cannot say if the toughness of his body can be compared with Yi Ziwen's. Notes. 1. Han seal, also referred to as Shaking Mountain seal. Yi Shiwen had obtained this secret heritage from the Tomb Keeper. Whenever this seal is invoked, a huge mountain made up purely of energy appears in the sky. Then at Yi Zaiwen's command, this mountain falls down upon its target. 2. Spirit Qi, also referred to as Lingqi, is actually the spirit energy present in the atmosphere. Chapter 329. We can't be sure. After all, this is the true martial university, and not the influence of some secluded regional territory. These geniuses aren't worth mentioning around here, even if they used to be famous earlier. These new disciples look lively to me. Well, they must hurry up and go inside quickly. Tomorrow will be the last day for this term's enrollment for new disciples. Yi Shiwen directly entered the city. The Ying-Xian city was the only city to welcome the new disciples. No one knew the exact age of this city, or how much it had expanded over the time. It was large enough to accommodate 2 to 3 million people easily, at any particular time. However, at present, the warriors were arriving one after another from various ancient roads to join the university. They added up to no less than hundreds of thousands of people, plus those who had been selected earlier. All these added up to a total of over 1 million people. In addition, there were a lot of senior disciples who lived here all year round. On the whole, the Ying-Xian city looked somewhat crowded. Yi Shiwen looked for a guest house to stop over. In the city, all such inns were basically owned by some old disciples. They used truth-level outer disciples as waiters and attendants in the inn. Most of these truth-level disciples were usually at 5th or 6th stage. These disciples were the descendants of older disciples, who couldn't help but married inside the true martial university. After several generations, these descendants wandered about destitute. They were basically stranded outside. In the end, they ended up becoming recorded name disciples of true martial university. In reality, the general population inside the true martial university was no different. Yi Shiwen had originally intended on finding Qi Fifan and the other fellow disciples from Yi Yuan school. However, he later heard that they had already chosen an inheritance and had left for different places 1 year after their arrival in the university. Nowadays, a number of books on general knowledge of true martial university were being sold everywhere inside the city. Naturally, Yi Shiwen also bought a book and finally developed an understanding of the entire foundation of true martial university after reading it. There was an endless stretch of Sierra in the center of the true martial university. Magnificent mountain peaks continuously rose one after another. No one knew how many mountains had come together to form this mountain range. Every mountain had a mountain peak, and each peak represented an inheritance. After all said and done, no one knew how many inheritances actually existed in the university. In fact, no one really knew when this university was established. However, there had always been people who would step up to represent a peak's inheritance ever after its establishment. A majority of people could choose different inheritances according to their preferences in the beginning itself, apart from a few exceptions. Naturally, different inheritances had different strength level requirements. The mere names of the strong inheritances could make people's scalps go numb. However, fortunately, everyone was a successful martial arts practitioner. Hence, one could figure out the exact strength level of an inheritance with just a sweep of soul search. And based on the assessment, one could make a choice. There were huge differences between each of the natural heritages associated with these various inheritances. Each of these inheritances had their individual secret heritage. Not to mention that there were large differences between these secret heritages. Some of these inheritances were very strong, while others were inferior. That is because some inheritances had been left behind by the powerhouses of past generations. Some of them had been left behind by sage-level powerhouses. Such inheritances were considered the weakest. In fact, more than 70% of inheritances were of this kind. In addition, a part of these inheritances had been left behind by great sage-level powerhouses. Such inheritances were considered relatively stronger than the others. However, the genuinely strong inheritances were the ones which had been left behind by the powerhouses who were even above the great sage level. These inheritances naturally had countless people rushing in to join, almost as if these disciples were on a wild goose chase. However, the strongest among all the inheritances were the so-called top 100 inheritances. That's because they were set up at the time of the university's establishment. No one knew how many powerhouses had emerged from these top 100 inheritances over the last innumerable years. Hence, only they could be considered as the strongest of inheritances. Over the past years, more than 70% of the powerhouses had emerged from these top 100 inheritances. However, these top 100 inheritances were also the ones that every disciple yearned for. These top 100 inheritances were surely very powerful, but their selection criterion was quite stringent as well. Unless a truth-level disciple did not fall in the category of peerless monstrous geniuses, they simply weren't allowed to join any of the top 100 inheritances. The minimum requirement was half-step legendary realm. That too after properly checking the talent of the disciple. An ordinary disciple was expected to at least have the cultivation of half-step legendary's third or fourth stage in order to enter these inheritances. In fact, some of the tyrannical inheritances in the group of top 100 inheritances only accepted disciples of half-step legendary 6th stage or higher, disciples of half-step legendary 5th stage or higher, and under the age of 50 were small in numbers. However, disciples of this level above the age of 50 were not small in numbers. In fact, every 3 out of 4 adults were at this level. Yi Shiwen looked for a window seat to settle down inside the liveliest hall of the inn. He stared blankly towards the distant street, and was soon lost in his own thoughts. The martial heritage of true martial university is really profound. It's simply far beyond my imagination. Comparing it with Yiyuan School is simply like distinguishing between cloud and mud. Yi Shiwen couldn't help but sigh with emotion. Even the pedestrians on the streets were experts of Truth Realm or higher. Naturally, the experts of Xiantian Realm and Hotian Realm were not allowed to pass through the city's gate. The name and fame of these geniuses didn't hold any value here. They were nothing more than a joke. Everything needed to be started from the scratch after arriving here. One needed to put both the hands at work and strive to become successful again. Originally, Yi Shiwen had thought that the first thing he would do after arriving at the true martial university was to find Qi Fifan and the other from his school. Now, it seemed as if it was similar to finding a needle in a haystack. Moreover, they had already chosen their favorite inheritances and had dispersed to their respective places. Therefore, finding them was easier said than done. And so he must wait till later to nurture himself and make personal contacts to find their whereabouts. Although the true martial university was an educational institution, but it was more like a small country in reality. In fact, Yi Shiwen was quite glad that he chose to come to true martial university. Otherwise, he would have been similar to a frog at the bottom of the well, thinking that the world was only as big as its well. Well, you wouldn't have found the means to gain such experiences for a lifetime if you had continued to stay in the southeast region. Yi Mo said with a nod. These 2 days, the last group of new disciples has also arrived. Did you all see what happened yesterday? That person called Yi Shiwen broke his way into the city through the main gate. His has cultivated deeply. He at least has the cultivation of a half-step legendary small complete realm. He will probably become a core disciple after joining in. Yes, if he goes to some small inheritance, he will be treated as a true disciple who has come to train. Yes, those of us who are nothing but the disciples of complete truth realm, we would be treated as outer disciples, even if we were to join a small inheritance. That is not bad, you know. We have the advantage since our age is not over 50 years yet. Otherwise, the truth-level disciples can only exist as registered name disciples. Not to mention that registered name disciples are equivalent to servants in the university. But we would still have an illustrious reputation outside, even if we are considered as servants in true martial university. Even the ordinary experts of legendary realm wouldn't dare to gesticulate while talking to us. Having the age of less than 50 years and still being able to reach complete truth realm. If these experts would be considered extraordinary if they were in the 10 countries of Southeast region. However, here, they could only be reduced to the rank of registered name disciples, and yet they still were secretly delighted. Yi Shiwen secretly pondered that even these so-called geniuses did not mention their qualifications in this top university of the southern region. In fact, only a few people dared to refer to themselves as geniuses. In reality, they all had become ordinary people. This time's fiercest and most powerful new disciples are those few ones with special physique. However, this is also very rare. What do you mean by special physique? How come I never heard of that? These extraordinary physiques are very rare, almost very difficult to find. Even I don't know exactly. But some new disciples with special fierce physiques have arrived sweeping all the way from the ancient road. They are completely unstoppable, and there are rumors that they will be chosen as true disciples, or even pro-disciples in the university. Are you talking about that guy with the Titan's body? I was present on the scene, and saw him with my own eyes. The city gate had collapsed upon nothing more than just a strike of his palm, while those puppets had been smashed to pieces. He had made a complete mess to pass through the gate. In addition, that one with Phoenix body had used a sea of fire to burn those wooden puppets, which couldn't even resist, and were directly reduced to ashes. So fierce. Good gracious, we have so many ferocious characters joining the university. How we will mix them. I just wanted to come to true martial university to flex my muscles. And here I am, almost reduced to the rank of a mere odd jobs disciple. The comparison between us and them is simply like distinguishing between mud and cloud. There is nothing to be discouraged about. Although those people with extraordinary physiques are ferocious, they are very few in numbers. The majority of new disciples are ordinary experts. In the past few days, the masters who have arrived are all ordinary masters, and they have run amok throughout their journey. These ordinary experts are also not inferior to those people. What are these special physiques? Do you know about them? Yi Shiwen asked Yemo in a low voice. Yi Shiwen showed a bit of interest toward those people with extraordinary physiques. Were these extraordinary physiques really so ferocious? I certainly do know about it. In common terms, it can be described as mutation. Every race has a certain mutation, and it is actually quite common. For example, some people are innately stronger than others since the day they are born. But this kind of mutation has small scope. On the other hand, the mutation of those extraordinary physiques is substantial, and on a deeper level. Yemo further explained, for example, those with the mutation of a Titan's body, or our Devil World's famous Great Azura body and so on. However, these people are often quite ferocious in nature. The so-called martial practice generally depends on two innate factors. First is natural talent and the second factor is intelligence. A person who isn't intelligent cannot possibly comprehend anything. This is the general definition of a genius. The talent is deep-rooted in the very bones of these geniuses. Some people can naturally bridge their 100 arteries and directly pass from the Hotian realm to the Xiantian realm. Some people can naturally practice fire attribute power technique law at a very fast speed. From this comparison, one can see that the former type is very common, but the latter type is quite rare. And those with special physiques belong to the latter. However, if someone belongs to both the types, then that will be truly terrifying. Then they might become strong by unimaginable proportions, going far beyond common people's imagination. Notes. Small complete realm. This is a level that lies between 5th stage and 6th stage. It basically means that the expert is halfway through the realm. True disciple equals it's just a rank within the university. It has nothing to do with the cultivation level of truth realm. Outer disciples complete truth realm. This is a cultivation level that lies between truth 9th peak and half-step legendary realm. Truth 9th stage. Chapter 330. Yi Shiwen was amazed. There were two factors which define the meaning of a genius. In fact, one factor was enough for an expert to stand out among his peers. Moreover, an expert who possessed both the factors had not yet emerged. If such an expert were to make an appearance, then they would be sure to become an overnight celebrity. Some mutations occur because of the flow of the blood of other races in one's body. For example, a person with a heavenly phoenix body must have the phoenix's blood running within the body. Yemo said. This kind of person is very difficult to deal with when he appears. However, you need not worry as your gilded tyrant form is not bad. If you practice it to the pinnacle level, then it will be sufficient to help you fight them. You may even surpass the very founder of this strange technique." Yi Shiwen nodded. His gilded tyrant form was indeed exceptional. Once he had crossed the first layer of the gilded tyrant form, he had almost perfected this technique himself. Even then, he didn't dare to claim credit for it. This was because for the successful practice of his gilded tyrant form, at least half the credit had to be attributed to the first layer of tyrant body technique. As they say, no matter how tall a building is, if its foundation isn't solid, then it would be nothing more than a shabby building built on soybean dregs. Yi Shiwen had merely patched the existing power technique. He hadn't really tried to create a power technique of his own. However, thanks to the gilded tyrant form, Yi Shiwen had never fallen into a disadvantageous situation when it came to his Buddhist toughness, except when he had to fight much stronger opponents. Otherwise, he would have often had an upper hand in the fights, thanks to his formidable gilded body. However, the emergence of these special physiques had made Yi Shiwen feel somewhat excited. Earlier, he hadn't known about the existence of people with special physiques. He only knew that the Great Azura body was considered to be the strongest body type in the devil world. He used to think that sooner or later, he would have to fight the devil with the Great Azura body. However, he had never thought that he would soon get an opportunity to fight people who had special physiques. Although those people have extraordinary physiques and are quite hard to deal with, it can be said that they are walking on a rather narrow road. If they cannot find an authentic road to follow, with an appropriate power technique to assist them along the way, then their so-called special physiques will go to waste. Moreover, they might even end up being inferior to us. Indeed. Even among those experts whose names can move the entire world, these people with special physiques are very few in numbers. In fact, the majority of them are ordinary people like us. The others agreed one by one to what had just been said. Even after knowing how powerful the people with special physiques could be, they still didn't want to give in to their awe-inspiring might. Yi Shiwen nodded. Although the people with special physiques were fierce, they were very few in numbers, possibly 1 in millions. No matter what, we are still going to sign up in the university. If we can pass the assessment, we will be able to progress as martial artists by using those big inheritances to our advantage. Those big inheritances are good, but I am afraid that if we enter them, we will have to start from the bottom level. In that case, will there really be any difference between us and those registered name disciples? It is better to join the small inheritances. I agree that they have been left behind by the experts of the sage realm. However, we will at least get to cultivate for the rest of our lives, until we enter the sage realm. Once that happens, we may even be regarded as the elite crop. Everyone had their own opinions. Yi Shiwen also felt somewhat dizzy after seeing so many inheritances. Each inheritance had its own background of considerable degree. In fact, it could be said that the backgrounds of most of these inheritances were far above Yuan schools. Days passed one by one until 1 month had already passed in the blink of an eye. Most people had already found the inheritances that suited them. Only Yi Shiwen had not been able to find one. He had come across many suitable inheritances, but as soon as they would find out his identity, they immediately rejected him. Although his reputation among these new disciples was not the most dazzling one, it was still quite good. Except Yi Shiwen, almost all the new disciples who had burst through the city gate to enter it had been selected by tyrannical inheritances. Over time, Yi Shiwen also became thoroughly famous as someone with excellent aptitude, who was being shunned by the major inheritances. Slowly some rumors and slanders began to circulate among the new disciples. That Yi Shiwen is indeed unfortunate. Among the new disciples, he is easily among the top 100 incredible ones. In the past, he used to be regarded as a treasured individual, but now he is nothing more than a weed that nobody wants. This is not so because he has offended the members of the law enforcement hall, but rather because he killed a law enforcement disciple. That disciple was not really important, but by killing him, Yi Shiwen has invoked the wrath of the law enforcement hall. How will people dare to accept him now? Yes. The small inheritances cannot afford to offend law enforcement hall, and the big inheritances don't wish to offend them for just one individual. It is quite unfortunate for a talent like him. It is said that in his journey he has killed many arrogant masters all the way. He certainly wouldn't have thought that his fate would be to end up like this. However, the fact is that the members of Law Enforcement Hall are wrong. These people intercepted a new disciple like Yi Shiwen at the Yingxian city gate in order to kill him. If he had died an untimely death, then shouldn't one ask them for an explanation? How is that not unreasonable of them? These Law Enforcement Hall's members have always been oppressive and tyrannical. They wield the laws of true martial university. Those who obey the laws will prosper, and those who try to go against them will die. An ordinary person cannot dare to annoy them, or they would forever be on bad terms with the Law Enforcement Hall. This time they didn't act against Yi Shiwen because Yingxian City's lord acted as his guarantor, or the Law Enforcement Hall would have captured and executed him on the spot. However, the members of the Law Enforcement Hall have still managed to make it impossible for Yi Shiwen to join any inheritances. I must say that their management power is quite amazing. If things go on like this, Yi Shiwen would sadly have no choice but to leave. Excuse me, young disciple Yi, but you do not meet the criteria on which we are recruiting new disciples. Precious jade and stones were used to pave the main mountain road. The dense fog was emitting a faint light, and together with the spiritual energy, it made the entire mountain range seem like paradise on earth. Yi Shiwen walked up the stone steps and then down. His countenance showed indifference. One simply couldn't tell that he had been rejected once again. The people in the surroundings were looking strangely at him, as they couldn't tell whether he was happy or sad. Their gazes didn't affect his mood either. These people are simply lower than dogs. This true martial university is no big deal. Yi Mo said indignantly. He favored Yi Shiwen, and had also selected Yi Shiwen to become the next devil. However, even a small inheritance was not willing to take him in. This was a matter of extraordinary shame and humiliation for Yi Mo. Yi Shiwen didn't say anything in response. When he had been rejected for the first time, he had felt anger. At present, he was just calm and indifferent. This month had been enough for him to think a lot of things through. The Law Enforcement Hall truly had great influence inside True Martial University. The true extent of their power was hard to imagine. No wonder Yingxian City's lord had such a sorry look on his face. However, if given the opportunity, he would choose the same path once again. He would change nothing. If he started flinching at the first sight of a small bit of difficulty, then his path would never improve. Experts faced many difficulties on their way. They had to firmly hold on to their beliefs in order to overcome all the obstacles on the way and move forward with conviction. Yi Shiwen descended from the mountain peak and moved on to another. In contrast to the mountain peak from a while ago, which had a jade pavement and magical energy floating in the air, this mountain peak looked fairly mediocre. The road going uphill was neither renovated nor maintained. One could see that weeds had piled up on the road all the way to the hilltop. This was because no one bothered that the entire road was submerged in weeds all year round. No disciples could be seen flying around in the sky here, unlike other peaks. All these things were indicated that this peak had already declined. Yi Shiwen is climbing the Hidden Star Peak. Seeing Yi Shiwen set foot on this ancient peak, a lot of people became suddenly concerned about this unusual turn of events. Hidden Star Peak. Are you talking about the Hidden Star Peak which has been hanging at the end of the top 100 inheritances for countless years? Yes, I am talking about that Hidden Star Peak. But I have heard that the Hidden Star Peak used to be extremely rich and powerful once. However, the experts of the Hidden Star Peak later put together their main forces and fought a hard war with foreign beings. The war resulted in the demise of all the experts. This triggered the decline of Hidden Star Peak. The Hidden Star Scriptures were also lost after the war. Without the Hidden Star Scriptures, the Hidden Star Peak naturally declined with time. For thousands of years, it has managed to barely hang at the end of the top 100 inheritances. Although it is still counted in the top 100 inheritances, perhaps its background is no more than that of an ordinary inheritance. In addition, the temperament of all the disciples on this peak is eccentric. It's not advisable to provoke them. But I think that this trip of Yi Shiwen will also go in vain. The Law Enforcement Hall has already announced that whoever recruits Yi Shiwen shall be offending them in the process. The Hidden Star Peak declined countless years ago, and is unlikely to offend the Law Enforcement Hall for the sake of Yi Shiwen. As far as these comments were concerned, Yi Shiwen had turned a deaf ear to them long ago. Earlier, he had read through the information booklet and learnt about the Hidden Star Peak as well as its location. If the Hidden Star Peak didn't possess such a glorious history, then he would never have shown any interest in it. Yi Shiwen was naturally proud. He carried several exceptional inheritances which had secretly been transmitted to him. Every one of them was sufficient to turn into a peak-level inheritance in its own. The ordinary inheritances couldn't attract his attention at all. The Hidden Star Peak was his final stop. If he failed to get accepted here as well, then he would choose to leave True Martial University. Not to mention that those small inheritances would most likely also choose not to offend the Law Enforcement Hall. Yi Shiwen followed along a dirt road to go uphill through a meadow. This road was not paved with jades or precious stones. He could tell that nobody had taken care of this road in a very long time. It was not hard to tell that there weren't many disciples in the Hidden Star Peak. From the looks of it, he noticed that this peak didn't even have odd jobs for disciples for maintenance. Almost everywhere along the sides of the road, one could clearly see the ruins of magnificent houses, which had apparently belonged to the disciples of the Hidden Star Peak during its golden age. According to the provisions of the True Martial University, besides the members of a particular inheritance, only a few of the elite disciples were allowed to live on the main peak. A majority of the disciples were supposed to live in the huge city, surrounded by True Martial Mountain Range. Within the city, many inheritances had their own designated areas where their disciples used to practice. However, the Hidden Star Peak was left with only 2 or 3 disciples, and even they did not wish to live on the main peak. They had no choice but to live in the city. Chapter 331. Yi Shiwen was walking up the peak step by step. One couldn't refrain from flying inside the True Martial University, because one's legs would break if one tried to walk to travel inside the huge university. However, this was the only time when it was considered necessary to walk with absolute sincerity in one's heart. Yi Shiwen ascended in light steps, and when he reached the top, a young man suddenly came to stand in front of him. He was roughly over 20 years of age. His eyebrows were straight and slanted upwards. His gaze was as sharp as a sword and his eyes resembled stars. He was tall and handsome. The heroic spirit thrived upon this person, as was visible from his facial features. He was clad in a white robe and appeared quite carefree and at ease. "Are you Yi Shiwen?" the man asked. "Yes," Yi Shiwen nodded. "Come with me." The man didn't say any words of rejection. This made Yi Shiwen feel relaxed and he heaved a sigh of relief. "I am Bai Jiansong. I am the 3rd disciple of this generation of Hidden Star Peak. Now, you are also a disciple of our Hidden Star Peak. There are 2 more disciples who had arrived earlier than you," Bai Jiansong said. "Nice to meet you, 3rd brother." Yi Shiwen cupped his hands in greetings and asked in astonishment, "Isn't there any need of assessment?" "What kind of assessment? We only have a few people. If we were to take an assessment, there would be nobody left. Out of so many people who join the True Martial University, where will the inferior talent go? Many peerless geniuses come out of small regions, and the ones with good aptitude are chosen among the top picks." Bai Jiansong didn't hide anything. He was not worried that Yi Shiwen would be scared away. Who in the entire True Martial University didn't know about the current situation of Hidden Star Peak? It could be said that there was nothing good to hide in the first place. Long ago, a large number of disciples used to arrive at the Hidden Star Peak every term. The reason was quite simple. Although Hidden Star Peak could be said to have declined many years ago, its heritage was Hidden Star Scriptures. After all, it was considered the finest power technique of True Martial University. So much so that once upon a time, someone had become an invincible character after practicing the Hidden Star Scripture, and was ranked among one of the best of True Martial University. During its strong time, the Hidden Star Peak was ranked one among the top 10 great inheritances, and was known to have wealthy and illustrious big shots. However, a lot of experts died in that war, which laid the seeds of its decline at a very fast speed. Originally, however, only a few people had practiced this top-notch power technique. Those people collectively died, and as a result, the hidden star scripture was severed from the inheritance. However, the hidden star scripture still had a chance of reappearing, because it was believed that the hidden star peak had a stargazing cliff on its top. One could actually see the traces of an almighty martial principle, left behind since ancient times on this cliff. It was said that the founder of the hidden star peak had obtained enormous inspiration from these traces. Afterwards, he had formed the hidden star scripture. The existence of this star cliff was an indication that some people still had the opportunity to comprehend the hidden star scripture. As a result, a lot of people used to arrive on this peak, only to leave in disappointment in the end. Then slowly everyone lost their interest in the hidden star peak, because the other prominent peaks didn't exactly have inferior power techniques in comparison to the hidden star scripture. Moreover, there was no guarantee that after thousands of years of dormancy, they would be able to readily comprehend it one day. So why would they want to join the hidden star peak just for the hidden star scripture? As a result, each generation of the hidden star peak only had 2 to 3 disciples. In the most miserable times, the peak would only have one disciple as their sole descendant. Yi Shiwen looked at the third brother by Jian Song. His aura was restrained, yet unfathomably profound. A transcendental aura was overflowing from his body in the surroundings. Yi Ziwen's pupils suddenly contracted. This kind of aura was not of the sage realm, but was actually of the half-step sage realm. With this kind of cultivation, he could become a powerful figure in a small inheritance. Although the hidden star peak was known to have declined many years ago, it was clearly much stronger than his imagination. The opposite party was merely 2 realms ahead of him, but his cultivation had already reached such a tyrannical point. This was simply hard to imagine. Third brother, I have offended the people of Law Enforcement Hall. I am afraid that it will also bring some trouble to you. Yi Shiwen decided to tell the truth. If we are not afraid of them, then what are you afraid of? Law Enforcement Hall. Humph, for all those years, they have been too arrogant and have overstepped their bounds. They have enslaved many of university's disciples to devote their lives to them. Their fate is indeed dark. Bai Jiansong said, since you have joined the hidden star peak, you have become a disciple of this peak. If the Law Enforcement Hall's members dare to come here looking for you, they will definitely be courting death. Bai Jiansong opened his mouth and faintly released a tyrannical aura in the surroundings. He had an invincible self-confidence. Yi Shiwen speculated that this third brother perhaps was not an ordinary person. Since you have joined us, I must tell you the rules of the hidden star peak. Our rules are quite simple. You are not allowed to deceive the teachers, and you are not allowed to injure the disciples of the same peak. Apart from this, we will not mind anything you do, Bai Jiansong explained. Presently, the hidden star peak has 6 disciples including you. If you count the master, we are 7 people altogether. Yi Shiwen smiled wryly. The hidden star peak did really have only a few disciples. They were so small in number that altogether there were only 7 people. Basically, it could only be considered a mini martial art sect. The eldest brother was the first one to arrive on this peak. He has been following master since childhood. The second to join was a female disciple. She is our second sister called Lu Yanlan. She is currently undergoing closed-door training. Since the eldest brother and master are not present, and second sister is busy training, thus all the matters of the hidden star peak are being handled by me now. Under me is your 4th brother Yang Wenjun and your 5th sister Deng Shui Xian. They arrived before you. Bai Jiansong gave the complete introduction of the peak, and as expected, there were not too many people. It was a bit pitiful. Yi Shiwen followed by Jiansong, and both of them quickly arrived at the crest of the hidden star peak. 2 individuals were already waiting there. One of them was clad in a colorful robe, and was a bit taller than Yi Shiwen. He had thick eyebrows and big eyes, and there was a smile on his square face. Beside him was a young woman of almost 20 years of age. She was clad in a green long dress and her skin was fairer than snow. Her pointed chin and her small curved eyebrows were complementing her beauty. Her big watery eyes made her look extremely cute and charming. Yi Shiwen understood that they must be the fourth and the fifth disciples Yang Wenjun and Deng Shui Xian. Third brother, is he our new young disciple? Very good. I am not the youngest one, so you cannot order me to do anything. Deng Shui Xian had a tender gruff smile on her small face. She looked somewhat excited. You talk as though we order you around all the time. Yang Wenjun said, somewhat helplessly. It is nice to meet you, fourth brother and fifth sister, Yi Shiwen said as he cupped his hands in greetings. He saw that they were not bad at heart, and he therefore formed good opinions about them. The cultivation of his two fellow disciples was not shallow either. They must have been at the peak of legendary's 9th stage, and soon would step into the half-step sage realm. Then their cultivation would become extremely tyrannical. Well, you will have plenty of time to talk later. Now at first, I am going to find the star-gazing cliff with the sixth brother. Bai Jiansong said, interrupting Yi Ziwen's train of thoughts. With Bai Jiansong leading the way, Yi Shiwen proceeded towards the sacred land of the Hidden Star Peak, where the star-gazing cliff was located. The entire Hidden Star Peak once used to thrive because of this cliff. The star-gazing cliff looks similar to any other ordinary cliff. However, Bai Jiansong said, we cannot see any clues during the daytime. We will have to wait till the evening. I am sure that this star-gazing cliff will change at that time. Just when the evening was nearing, the curtain of night fell to completely cover the earth. A burst of stars' power illuminated in the sky, and was unexpectedly absorbed by the face of the cliff. At this time, the face of the star-gazing cliff began to change slowly before Yi Ziwen's eyes. It gradually began to look different from before. The silhouette of a person began to sway, and it appeared as if an expert was practicing some kind of peerless martial arts. Also, it seemed as if someone was chanting the sutras to explain the world's most exceptional mysteries. Yi Shiwen gradually became lost in thoughts, and his mysterious space began to operate crazily. Yi Shiwen immediately began to break down the truth and reasoning behind the evolution, which was being projected upon the face of the star-gazing cliff. Bai Jiansong was standing nearby, and actually saw Yi Shiwen falling into a meditative state, as if trying to comprehend the essentials. He was surprised. One must know that the star-gazing cliff had been standing erect over here for God knows how many years. It was hard to tell till when it would remain like this. However, even after so many years, the comprehension of the hidden star scripture from the star-gazing cliff had always been a part of the legends. Most people perceived this cliff as a piece of mountain that shone in the night and nothing more. The Hidden Star Peak was considered as a broken inheritance because besides the first generation's founder, no one had been able to comprehend the hidden star scripture from the star-gazing cliff. The Hidden Star Peak had remained in decline for so many years. But finally, the peak's master had arrived. He had slowly started restoring a portion of the hidden star scripture little by little. However, even after all these years of effort, the Hidden Star Peak only showed a little improvement. The eldest disciple was also able to comprehend a part of the hidden star scripture with the help of the star-gazing cliff. These two men had tried their best to restore the hidden star scripture. They would mutually verify with each other and join the broken parts of their own comprehension. They believed that the day was not very far when the hidden star scripture would be completely restored. Now it turned out that the sixth disciple of the Hidden Star Peak was capable of comprehending the traces of martial arts on the star-gazing cliff. Could it be that the heavens had decided to return the glory to the Hidden Star Peak after innumerable years? Bai Jiansong could not control the excitement on his face after he saw this. How many geniuses had been able to comprehend the star-gazing cliff before? Was this an indication that something big was about to happen? Bai Jiansong immediately sat down cross-legged near Yi Shiwen. He laid out a protective barrier so that no one would disturb Yi Shiwen while he comprehended. This kind of an opportunity to comprehend principles was rare. In fact, most people would never get this type of an opportunity in their lifetime. It was entirely dependent on one's stroke of luck. However, Bai Jiansong was not aware of the existence of the mysterious space in Yi Ziwen's mind. Thanks to the existence of the mysterious space, Yi Shiwen could continue to comprehend unceasingly. As far as Yi Shiwen was concerned, His mysterious space was just helping him in comprehending principles. This was not a huge mystical matter for him. As long as there were sufficient spirit dawn, there would be no problem at all. At this time, stars were forming and exploding one by one inside Yi Ziwen's mind. It was just like the Big Bang of the universe, an unceasing cycle of life and death. During the birth and death of these stars, Yi Ziwen's comprehension of the star power continued to increase slowly. Yi Shiwen is in half-step legendary realm. The third disciple is in half-step sage realm. Yi Shiwen needs to jump 2 realms to reach the third disciple's level. Chapter 332. Stars were taking birth and exploding at the same time. It seemed as if Yi Shiwen had placed himself in a huge universe where he appeared so tiny. Yi Shiwen was so tiny in this huge universe that he was like a grain of dust particle drifting with the flow, while the stars seemed to be exploding on his sides. It seemed as if something had exploded inside Yi Ziwen's mind. He was having some sort of enlightenment, and the mysterious space was operating crazily. The loud sound of chanting scriptures almost perturbed the soul and consciousness of Yi Shiwen. However, he kept reading aloud patiently in his mind. For an ordinary person, it was impossible to maintain this deep-seated state of enlightenment for so long. This kind of state simply could not be sustained. The sound of chanting scriptures was quite fuzzy. One had to listen carefully many times in order to have only a vague understanding. This was also the reason why the Hidden Star Peak's master and the eldest disciple had been enlightened before. However, they didn't know any way to confirm that what they had heard was correct or not. In order to find out the correct version of the scripture, they had to mutually verify and proofread the outcomes of each other's comprehensions. However, Yi Shiwen was different. He could be in the perfect state of enlightenment for a long time. As long as there was enough chance for him to stick to doing it, the mysterious space could unceasingly analyze those traces of martial arts for him. At this time, certainly, the consumption of the spirit energy had also reached an astonishing level. Almost every second, he had to consume 10 spirit dawn. At this consumption rate, even the amount of spirit dawn that he possessed would not have lasted for too long. Considering Yi Ziwen's cultivation, the Hidden Star scripture was extremely profound. He didn't have the means to comprehend most of it. Presently, he was feeling quite agitated. The unknown silhouette of the Almighty Senior had been constantly repeating the same scriptures over and over again in front of him. It was not clear or completely remembered since how long Yi Shiwen had been listening to the same scriptures over and over again. He also realized that it was perhaps the complete version of the Hidden Star scripture. Moreover, it was comparable to the complete version which had been comprehended and practiced by the founder of the Hidden Star Peak. Yi Shiwen was not aware of what exactly lay in the original Hidden Star scripture that had been handed down in the very beginning, but he also knew that apart from him, no one else could stay under this high-intensity epiphany for such a long time. Although Yi Shiwen had a feeling that that fuzzy figure was chanting scriptures for him, it was nothing but a futile attempt. The recited text was full of vague concepts, and even remembering one sentence would be considered pretty well. In addition to this, there were many ambiguous spots in it. Yi Shiwen didn't know how many times he had listened to the scriptures, and how many times the mysterious space had analyzed them. Only after that, he dared to be certain that he had heard the final version. As for the comprehension of the Hidden Star scripture, Yi Shiwen finally came up with a preliminary concept. This Hidden Star scripture must be an extraordinary power technique left behind by an almighty being which utilized the great cycle of the world and the universe to draw the power of the universe. Then it would use the power of the universe to temper and refine oneself every day and every night. It was an unusually extraordinary practice. If practiced to the deepest level, with just a gesture of one's hand, one could break the universe or cause the stars to explode. It was so very terrifying. Certainly, this was the complete version of the Hidden Star scripture, otherwise it would be impossible to practice it to such an extent. While Yi Shiwen was continuously listening to the Hidden Star scripture and getting clearer insights, on the outside the power of the stars had begun to gradually shine upon Yi Ziwen's body from the night sky. It had spread out a layer of silvery white cloth on his body, With Yi Ziwen's comprehension of the hidden star scripture nearing completion, the power of the stars in the sky was rising crazily and was frantically illuminating his body. His body had absorbed the starlight which had slowly taken the shape of a gigantic storm. The power of the stars had condensed to form a storm. Bai Jiansong was startled as he saw this strange form of Yi Shiwen. He couldn't understand what had just happened to produce such a loud noise. He quickly laid out a huge enchantment barrier to cover Yi Shiwen from all sides, not allowing the strange form from divulging. Immediately, he felt a burst of ecstasy because he could see that Yi Shiwen had clearly comprehended the hidden star scripture. It was only possible to draw out the power of the stars which was crazily illuminating upon him after one had practiced the hidden star scripture. Since Yi Shiwen had comprehended the hidden star scripture, he was hoping that now it would be possible to restore its full version with his help. He didn't know that Yi Shiwen had not only comprehended the hidden star scripture, but also that his comprehension had been more complete and esoteric than that of the founder of the hidden star peak. Bai Jiansong remained silent and didn't dare to disturb the comprehension process of Yi Shiwen. However, he was very delighted. For Yi Shiwen, the hidden star scripture had an enormous reference value. However, this was not the road that he must take. The hidden star scripture would help him in accumulating experience to the utmost. It could allow him to borrow the strength of the heavens to run amok. He could be fearless and exceptional, but his limitless path of hegemony was in conflict with it. Because the road on which Yi Shiwen was walking required his body to be strong until he could break all the shackles, to achieve the supreme existence. In other words, the hidden star scripture would follow the path of primordial spirit method, whereas Yi Shiwen used corporeal body method. These two methods were entirely different. Although the hidden star scripture also had a method to temper one's body using the power of the stars, it was in the final phase of the primordial spirit method. For other people, perhaps it could be said that they didn't have any relation with this method because they could not come in contact with a matter of this level. However, for Yi Shiwen, it was only a matter of choice. Although Yi Mo was only a spirit, he had followed his master for far too long and knew a lot of things. Most of these things would be considered extremely mysterious for others, but it was casual for Yi Mo to know all this. Under Yi Mo's influence, Yi Shiwen had come to know about a lot of things which were simply unknown to other people. In the distant past, there used to be a powerful group of cultivators. They used primordial spirit method to realize the heavenly law. Ultimately, they placed their own primordial spirit above the heavenly law in order to achieve immortality. However, they had vanished a long time ago, and at least were considered rare in Wuxia. They were replaced by the rising martial experts, who walked on a completely different road. Those cultivators saw the entire universe as one circle. Moreover, they integrated themselves with the heavenly law to become a part of it. What they practiced was a completely different method. The martial warriors used another method in which they viewed their own corporeal body as a small circle to become a small universe themselves. Although the complete version of the hidden star scripture was extremely powerful, it was an entirely different path for Yi Shiwen. It was a path that Yi Shiwen could not choose. Yi Shiwen, this is a superb opportunity. You are in this rare state of enlightenment. Yi Mo said. If you don't want to practice the hidden star scripture, then I suggest you take the advantage of this opportunity to create your own power technique. Yi Shiwen knew what Yi Mo was trying to say. In fact, Yi Shiwen had been practicing the bright jade technique from the beginning until now. It certainly was not the original version of the bright jade technique. Rather, he had been constantly strengthening it for such a long time that it had already changed beyond recognition. Yi Shiwen regarded the bright jade technique as a valued, fair and honest technique in his arsenal. No matter which power technique he practiced, all of them were incorporated inside the orbit of the bright jade technique. Although Yi Shiwen had learnt several secret techniques, including those belonging to non-human races as well, he could wander freely without any inconvenience, thanks to the tolerant nature of the bright jade technique. Yi Shiwen had practiced a lot of power techniques which were incomparably overbearing. If not for the harmonious nature of the bright jade technique, it would have been difficult for him to manage his injuries. This was the reason why, even though he had obtained a lot of opportunities to practice even more formidable power techniques, he hadn't budged from his choice. However, the Bright Jade technique was too low a starting point. It was merely a Xiantian-level power technique. When the starting point itself was too low, even strengthening it further wouldn't work well. In fact, he had slowly become unable to keep up with Yi Ziwen's pace. He had finally become aware that the Bright Jade technique was merely a water jar. No matter how much effort was put to strengthen it, it could never become an ocean. It had been dragging down the pace of his progress. It was time to change it for good. In the outside world, the day had already received the first glimmer of light. The starlight had also gradually dissipated in the sky. The power of the stars, which had assembled frantically, had also disseminated gradually. However, Yi Ziwen's strange form actually hadn't reduced even a bit. On the contrary, it changed once again. Originally, only the power of the stars was being absorbed by him. However, right now, a cosmic aura was overflowing from his body. He was no longer absorbing the power of the stars. On the contrary, his body was actually emitting out the power of the stars. Yi Ziwen's body started emitting more and more powerful rays of light. His entire body began to appear like a huge star that was emitting endless rays of light, as if illuminating the entire universe. Yi Ziwen's imposing aura surged up and finally reached the peak. At this time, the protective barrier which had been laid out by Jiansong somewhat trembled, and Yi Shiwen suddenly opened his eyes. Finally, it's complete. Observing person scripture first layer. Inside Yi Ziwen's Dantian, a small dazzling sun was floating calmly and was illuminating his entire Dantian. Wuxia is the name of the continent this story is currently based in. Bright Jade Technique A.K. A Mingyu technique was the first power technique practiced by Yi Shiwen. Please check the first few chapters to learn more about it. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.